My name is Justine, and I am 33 years old. I stood in the middle of a luxurious Chicago country club, watching my mother hand my twin brother a giant novelty check for $2 million. When I quietly asked her to honor the promise she made to co-sign a modest $50,000 business loan for my own firm, she laughed so loud the neighboring tables turned to stare. She slid a $100 restaurant gift card across the white tablecloth and told me to go earn my own way while my brother mocked my career. I had no idea that a year later, at my grandfather's will reading, I would be handed an envelope that legally made me their primary creditor, causing my mother to scream like a madman as she realized I held their entire future in my hands. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Growing up in a wealthy suburb of Chicago, the dynamic between my twin brother Bradley and me was established early. We might have shared a womb, but we certainly did not share our mother's affection. My mother Barbara made it her life's mission to pave Bradley's path with gold, while treating my ambitions as a mildly amusing inconvenience. We had both just graduated with our Master of Business Administration degrees from the same prestigious university, but our journeys to that stage could not have been more different. While Bradley lived in a luxury off-campus apartment paid for by our mother and drove a European sports car to his classes, I was pulling 80-hour weeks. I worked 2 grueling jobs bartending at night and doing freelance tax preparation on the weekends, just to keep my student debt from suffocating me. I had a vision. I was preparing to launch my own boutique forensic accounting firm. I wanted to build something real, tracking financial fraud, investigating corporate embezzlement, and finding hidden assets. Bradley, on the other hand, spent his business school years attending fraternity parties and pitching buzzword-heavy startup ideas that had zero actual business models. The graduation dinner was held at the Oak Brook Country Club, a place where the chandeliers dripped with crystal, and the membership fees cost more than my entire college tuition. The private dining room was filled with our extended family, my mother's wealthy friends, and a few of Bradley's college buddies. I sat quietly near the end of the table in a practical navy suit I had bought on sale, sipping sparkling water. Bradley sat at the center of attention wearing a tailored Italian suit that our mother had bought him as a graduation present. He was holding court, loudly explaining his new tech startup called AuraSync. According to Bradley, it was going to revolutionize synergy in the digital workspace. When our uncle asked him how the technology actually worked or how it would generate revenue, Bradley just waved his hand dismissively and used phrases like paradigm shift and disruptive algorithms. I could see the glaring cracks in his business plan from across the room, but my mother looked at him like he was the absolute pinnacle of human achievement. As the main courses were cleared away, my mother stood up and tapped her silver spoon against her champagne flute. The room quieted down immediately. She beamed at Bradley, her eyes shining with absolute adoration. "Today, we are celebrating the future," she announced, her voice echoing in the elegant room. "We are celebrating the incredible genius of my son. Bradley has always been destined for greatness, and today as he graduates, he is ready to take the tech world by storm." She paused dramatically, signaling 2 waiters who walked out from the kitchen carrying a massive ceremonial novelty check, the kind they give out at lottery winnings or charity golf tournaments. It was made out to AuraSync, and the amount written in bold black marker was $2 million. The room erupted into applause. Bradley stood up, feigning humility, and hugged our mother. $2 million. I felt the air leave my lungs. My mother had been talking about downsizing her real estate portfolio to free up some cash, but I had no idea she was liquidating assets to hand Bradley a fortune for a company that existed only on a slick presentation deck. After the applause died down and Bradley gave a smug speech thanking our mother for recognizing true visionary talent, people began returning to their drinks and conversations. My heart was hammering against my ribs. 6 months ago, my mother had explicitly agreed to co-sign a $50,000 small business loan so I could secure office space and purchase the necessary specialized software licenses to officially launch my forensic accounting firm. She had told me to wait until after graduation to finalize the paperwork, assuring me that she supported my sensible little math project. I took a deep breath, gathered my courage, and walked over to where she was sitting. She was busy admiring the giant check leaning against the wall. "Mom," I said quietly, trying to keep the conversation private. "Congratulations to Bradley. It is an amazing gift. I was wondering if we could talk about the bank paperwork for my firm. The loan officer needs the key-signer documents submitted by Tuesday so I can sign the lease on my office space." My mother stopped smiling. She looked at me as if I had just asked her to scrub the country club floors. "Justine, please." She sighed loudly. "Not right now. We are celebrating your brother's success." I kept my voice steady, though my hands were shaking. "I know, and I am happy for him. But you promised we would finalize the $50,000 loan cosign after graduation. I have clients waiting to sign retainers. I just need the startup capital for the infrastructure." My mother looked at me, then looked at Bradley, who had wandered over to listen. Suddenly she threw her head back and laughed. It was a sharp, mocking sound that cut through the ambient noise of the dining room. Several extended family members and guests at the adjacent tables turned their heads to stare at us. $50,000 for an accounting firm. She said, her voice raised deliberately so everyone could hear. "Justine, do not be absurd. Bradley is a visionary. He is creating the future of technology. You just look at spreadsheets all day. Anyone can crunch numbers. Why would I risk my credit rating on a glorified calculator service?" The humiliation burned hot in my cheeks. I could feel the eyes of our relatives on me, assessing my worth exactly as my mother had. "But you promised," I whispered, refusing to let the tears fall. "I built my entire business plan around that cosign. You told me to focus on my finals and you would handle the bank." She reached into her expensive designer purse, pulled out a small envelope, and slid it across the white tablecloth toward me. I opened it. It was a $100 restaurant gift card to a mid-tier steakhouse chain. "Consider that your graduation present," she sneered. "Go earn your own way. You have always been so obsessed with hard work. Well, now is your chance to prove it." Bradley leaned against the table, swirling his expensive scotch. "Come on, Justine, stop begging," he said with a patronizing smirk. "It is embarrassing. Look, when AuraSync takes off next month, I am going to need someone to keep track of the petty cash. I can hire you as a mid-level bookkeeper to keep you off the streets. You know, give you a little charity work so you do not have to wait tables anymore." The silence in my corner of the room was deafening. My own mother and twin brother were publicly humiliating me, treating my years of blood, sweat, and tears as a joke, while celebrating a $2 million fantasy. I looked at the gift card sitting on the pristine white tablecloth. Then I looked at the giant novelty check leaning against the wall. A profound sense of clarity washed over me. I was never going to get their support. I was never going to be seen as an equal. And trying to reason with them was a massive waste of my breath. I reached into my purse, pulled out my own debit card, and flagged down the waiter. I asked him to calculate exactly what I had consumed that evening, which was 1 glass of sparkling water and a side salad. I paid my portion of the bill, leaving a generous cash tip for the waiter. I picked up the $100 gift card and placed it directly onto Bradley's dinner plate, right on top of his half-eaten filet mignon. "You are going to need this more than I will when your fake company burns through that $2 million, I told him, my voice carrying a cold, clinical certainty. "Keep the spreadsheets organized, Bradley. The federal authorities are not as forgiving as Mom is." I turned on my heel and began walking toward the exit of the private dining room. I did not run. I did not cry. I walked with my head held high, ignoring the shocked gasps of my mother's friends. But as I reached the heavy oak doors of the dining room, I felt an intense gaze on me. I paused and looked toward the far end of the long banquet table. Sitting there silently sipping his bourbon was my grandfather Harrison. He was the patriarch of the family, a gritty blue-collar man who had built a massive manufacturing empire from the ground up with calloused hands and raw determination. He rarely spoke at these flashy family events, preferring to watch from the shadows. Our eyes met across the room. He looked from me to the gift card sitting on Bradley's steak, and then back to my face. Slowly, deliberately, Grandpa Harrison gave me a subtle, knowing nod. It was not a gesture of pity. It was a gesture of profound respect. A silent communication between the only two people in the room who actually understood the value of $1 and the meaning of hard work. I nodded back, stepped out of the country club, and walked into the cool Chicago night air, ready to build my empire from scratch. The next 12 months were a masterclass in severe sleep deprivation and relentless laser-focused ambition. While my peers from business school were cashing comfortable corporate paychecks and taking luxurious weekend trips to Cabo, I was operating my forensic accounting firm out of a 300-square-foot studio apartment in Logan Square. My dining table was a cheap folding card table buried under dual monitors, heavy stacks of financial disclosure forms, and half-empty cups of black coffee. I worked 80-hour weeks tracing hidden assets for high-profile divorce attorneys and finding embezzled funds for small local businesses. It was grueling, unglamorous work, but it was mine. I tracked cryptocurrency transfers across overseas exchanges and uncovered dummy corporations set up by cheating business partners. Every dollar I earned went straight back into my business, paying for advanced tracing software and highly encrypted secure servers. I ate cheap ramen noodles and wore the same 3 professional suits on a strict rotation, but my client roster was steadily growing. My reputation for being meticulous, ruthless, and entirely incorruptible was starting to spread through the Chicago legal and financial districts. The massive breakthrough I had been working toward came on a rainy Tuesday in October. I landed a contract with Vanguard Capital Partners, one of the most ruthless and successful venture capital firms in the Midwest. They needed a third-party independent auditor to conduct deep-dive due diligence on a slate of tech startups they were considering for their upcoming Series B funding rounds. They wanted someone who could look past the flashy pitch decks and Silicon Valley jargon to find the actual financial heartbeat of these companies. They specifically chose me. It was a massive retainer, the kind of contract that would allow me to finally move out of my studio apartment and rent actual office space in a respectable commercial building. I had proven my mother wrong. I had earned my own way through grit and intelligence. Meanwhile, my twin brother Bradley was living a completely different reality. If you looked at his social media pages, you would think he was the next major tech billionaire. His feeds were a constant curated stream of manufactured success. There was Bradley leaning against a brand new silver Porsche in the financial district. There was Bradley holding a glass of expensive scotch on the balcony of a River North penthouse apartment. There was Bradley standing on stage at minor tech conventions, pointing at meaningless graphs with hashtags about hustle culture and visionary leadership. But in the forensic accounting world, you learn very quickly that loud wealth is almost always a cover for quiet, desperate insolvency. Sync had not released a single viable product in the past year. They had no software updates, no actual daily active users, and zero legitimate revenue streams. I knew this because the tech industry in Chicago is incredibly small, and people talk. So how exactly was a company with zero revenue funding, a chief executive officer's penthouse and luxury sports car? The answer was our mother. Through the grapevine of extended family gossip and public property records, I discovered the dark truth. Barbara had quietly taken out massive second mortgages on the family vacation home in Lake Geneva and our childhood estate in the suburbs. She was aggressively liquidating her own financial stability to fund Bradley's illusion, pouring millions of dollars into a sinking ship just to keep up appearances at her country club luncheons. She was financing his fragile ego at the ultimate cost of the family legacy. Our two completely separate worlds collided exactly 3 weeks after I signed the Vanguard contract. The venture capital firm sent over their highly confidential shortlist of potential investments for the upcoming quarter. I sat in my dark apartment illuminated only by my dual monitors, opening the encrypted files one by one. There were health tech platforms, logistics software companies, and green energy startups. And then I clicked on the fourth digital folder. The name AuraSync flashed across my screen. My blood ran completely cold. Vanguard was actually considering investing $20 million into my brother's empty shell of a company. I stared at the preliminary financial documents Bradley had submitted to the venture capital firm. Even a cursory glance at the balance sheets made my stomach churn with anxiety. The user acquisition numbers were wildly inflated. The operational costs were categorized using vague, misleading accounting terms designed to hide the fact that investor capital was being funneled directly into executive lifestyle expenses. It was not just a bad investment. It was a sophisticated financial trap designed to steal millions. I was in the middle of drafting my initial risk assessment when the buzzer to my studio apartment rang loudly. I pressed the intercom expecting the delivery driver dropping off my dry cleaning. Instead, my mother's voice crackled through the speaker, sharp and demanding. "Let me up, Justine." I buzzed her in, feeling a heavy knot tighten in my jaw. I had not spoken a single word to Barbara since the night she handed me that restaurant gift card at the country club. When I opened my door, she stepped into my cramped studio, looking utterly out of place in her tailored designer suit and pristine salon blowout. She wrinkled her nose as she took in the folding table, the bare walls, and the tiny kitchen area. "This is where you work?" she asked, her tone dripping with intense disdain. "It is absolutely pathetic." I crossed my arms defensively. "It is highly profitable," I corrected her, keeping my voice even. "What do you want, Mom? I do not have time for a casual social visit." She did not bother pretending she was there to catch up or apologize. She dropped her heavy designer handbag on my small sofa and turned to face me, her eyes hard and calculating. "I know you are consulting for Vanguard Capital Partners," she said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Bradley's lead investor contact told him Vanguard hired an outside forensic firm for due diligence, and your name came up during a meeting. I maintained my professional composure, refusing to show any intimidation. "Vanguard is my client. I cannot discuss their operations or my private contracts with you. You know that is against the law." She took an aggressive step closer, invading my personal space. "Drop the corporate act with me, Justine. I know AuraSync is on their shortlist for Series B funding. Bradley desperately needs that $20 million injection. He is on the verge of a massive technological breakthrough, and Vanguard is the key to everything." I looked at her, completely baffled by her sheer audacity. "You came to my home to talk about Bradley's business." "No, I came here to tell you how you are going to handle the audit," she demanded, pointing a manicured finger directly at my chest. "You are going to review Bradley's financials, and you are going to write a glowing report. You are going to validate his user metrics, and you are going to tell Vanguard that AuraSync is the most secure, promising investment on their entire roster." I stared at her, letting the massive weight of what she was asking sink in. "You want me to commit federal fraud?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "You want me to falsify official financial documents and lie to a major venture capital firm so your son can steal $20 million from them?" "Do not use that word." She snapped, her face flushing bright red with anger. "It is not stealing. It is securing necessary capital. Bradley just needs a financial bridge until the software officially launches. You are going to do this for your family." "Family?" I repeated the word, tasting like ash in my mouth. "You made it very clear a year ago that I was on my own. You told me to go earn my own way. I did exactly that. I built this firm entirely on my integrity. My whole professional reputation relies on my audits being brutally accurate and unbiased. If I doctor those reports, I lose my license. I could face severe prison time." "You are being completely dramatic," she scoffed, waving her hand as if batting away an annoying fly. "Nobody goes to prison over a slightly optimistic financial projection. You will massage the numbers, Justine. You owe this to your brother." "I owe him absolutely nothing." I fired back, my anger finally breaking through my calm facade. "He is running a massive scam, Mom. I have seen the preliminary balance sheets. He has zero revenue. He is burning through your money to lease a Porsche and a penthouse while pretending to be a tech genius. You took out dangerous second mortgages to fund this delusion, and now you want me to risk my freedom to bail him out. Her eyes widened slightly, clearly shocked that I knew about her secret real estate mortgages, but her surprise quickly morphed into vicious, uncontrollable rage. "You listen to me, you ungrateful little girl," she hissed, grabbing my arm tightly. "I did not come here to ask for a favor. I came here to give you an instruction. You will approve OraSync for funding, or I will make sure your pathetic little accounting firm ceases to exist. I will use every connection I have in Chicago to blacklist you. I will call the partners at Vanguard myself and tell them you are a vindictive, estranged sister actively trying to sabotage a legitimate business out of petty childhood jealousy. I will completely ruin your reputation in this city before you even get off the ground." I pulled my arm out of her grip, stepping back toward my desk. The threat hung heavy in the stale air of my apartment, a clear declaration of war from the woman who was supposed to protect me. I stared into the cold, calculating eyes of the woman who had given birth to me. The sheer entitlement radiating from her posture was suffocating, but I refused to let her see me sweat. I walked over to the heavy metal door of my studio apartment and yanked it open, letting the hallway draft cut through the suffocating tension. "Get out," I said, pointing a steady finger toward the corridor. My voice did not shake. It was resolute and final. "You are not just asking me to cross an ethical line, Mom. You are demanding I commit a federal crime to shield your golden boy from his own incompetence. I will not doctor the Vanguard reports. I will not sign off on Bradley's imaginary numbers. If his company is legitimate, he will survive the audit. If it is a scam, he will burn. But I will not light the match, and I certainly will not burn with him." Barbara's face twisted into a mask of pure venom. "You are making a massive mistake, Justine. You think you are so righteous, so untouchable in your little makeshift office. You have absolutely no idea what I am capable of doing to protect this family." I looked her dead in the eye. "You are not protecting this family. You are protecting your ego. Get out before I call building security." She snatched her designer handbag off my sofa, her knuckles white with rage. As she marched out into the hallway, she turned back one last time. "Do not bother packing your briefcases," she sneered. "You will not have any clients left by tomorrow morning." I slammed the door shut, turning the deadbolt with a loud, definitive click. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird, but I immediately marched back to my dual monitors. I needed to finish the preliminary risk assessment and get it to Vanguard Capital Partners before Barbara could make good on her threats. I worked straight through the night compiling the initial red flags into a secure encrypted file. But I severely underestimated the sheer speed and ruthlessness of my mother's social maneuvering. At 8 o'clock the next morning, my cell phone rang. The caller ID displayed the name of Vanguard's senior managing partner, Richard Montgomery. I answered immediately, prepared to walk him through my initial findings on OraSync. Instead, his voice came through the speaker, crisp, cold, and entirely closed off. "Justine, we need to terminate your consulting contract effective immediately." I froze the coffee cup halfway to my mouth. "Richard, I do not understand. I have already uncovered massive discrepancies in the OraSync financials. You need to see this data." "I do not need to see anything from you," he replied, his tone dripping with professional disdain. "I just got off a 45-minute phone call with your mother, Barbara. She was completely distraught. She informed us about your long-standing estrangement from your family and your history of deep-seated jealousy toward your brother. She was practically in tears, explaining how you have harbored a vendetta against Bradley since business school and how you actively sought out this contract just to sabotage his funding out of spite." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Richard, that is a complete lie. She is trying to cover up a massive fraud scheme. Bradley has zero revenue. He is burning through illicitly obtained capital. My mother threatened me last night to doctor these exact reports. She warned me that your mental instability might lead you to make wild accusations." Richard interrupted, completely ignoring my defense. "Listen, Justine, Vanguard Capital Partners manages billions of dollars. We operate on absolute discretion and pristine reputations. We simply cannot involve our firm in a messy, toxic family feud." Whether your claims are true or false, the liability and the optics are completely radioactive. We are overnighting a termination agreement and a standard kill fee to your address. Do not contact this office again." The line went dead. I dropped my phone onto the desk, staring blankly at the dark screen. In less than 12 hours, my mother had orchestrated a masterclass in character assassination. She had played the weeping, concerned mother, perfectly weaponizing my own estrangement against me to protect a criminal. The kill fee Vanguard sent was barely enough to cover my monthly software subscriptions. Without their massive retainer, my financial projections collapsed instantly. I had turned down 3 smaller contracts to dedicate my time to Vanguard, and now I had absolutely nothing. The ensuing weeks were a dark, brutal descent into financial ruin. The industry gossip mill in Chicago moved with terrifying speed. Barbara did not just stop at Vanguard. She poisoned the well across the entire financial district. 2 other prospective clients suddenly ghosted my emails. A boutique law firm that usually contracted me for divorce asset tracking abruptly canceled our upcoming meetings, citing a sudden shift in their budget. My mother had effectively blacklisted me, executing a flawless professional blockade. She had reached out to everyone in her extensive social and professional network, spinning the same tragic tale of a deranged daughter trying to ruin her brilliant sibling. Nobody wanted to hire a forensic accountant who was rumored to fabricate evidence for personal revenge. By the 3rd week of November, the harsh Chicago winter had set in, and my bank account had dwindled to double digits. I was sitting on my cheap sofa wrapped in 2 blankets because I could not afford to turn up the radiator. I had already sold my secondary monitor and my professional grade printer just to keep the lights on. On my desk sat a bright pink piece of paper. It was a formal eviction notice. I was exactly 14 days away from being thrown out onto the freezing streets. All my hard work, all my late nights, all the sacrifices I had made to build an incorruptible reputation had been dismantled by a single lying phone call from a woman desperate to protect a fraud. I stared at my reflection in the dark monitor of my computer, feeling the crushing weight of total defeat. I had tried to play by the rules. I had tried to build a life based on facts, spreadsheets, and undeniable truths. But truth meant absolutely nothing when confronting people with the power and money to manipulate reality. Bradley was probably celebrating in his penthouse right now, popping expensive champagne, while I figured out how to pack my entire life into cardboard boxes. I opened a new browser tab and started looking up minimum wage bookkeeping jobs. Bradley's mocking voice from the country club echoed in my head, offering me a charity job to keep me off the streets. It made me physically sick to my stomach. I was beaten. I had fought a war against my own blood, and I had lost everything in the process. Just as I moved my cursor to close my email client, a notification pinged in the corner of my screen. A new message had arrived in my secure professional inbox. It was not a standard email. It was routed through a highly sophisticated encrypted server network, usually reserved for top-tier legal correspondence. The sender name made my heart skip a sudden violent beat. Theodore Caldwell. Mr. Caldwell was not just any lawyer. He was the senior partner at one of the most ruthless estate planning firms in the Midwest. And more importantly, he was the fiercely loyal personal attorney to my grandfather, Harrison. I had not spoken to my grandfather since that silent exchange of nods at the graduation dinner a year ago. I knew he had been traveling extensively and keeping a low profile, but seeing his attorney's name pop up on my screen felt like a jolt of electricity. I opened the encrypted message, my hands trembling slightly over the keyboard. The text was incredibly brief, devoid of any standard legal pleasantries. It read, "Justine, your grandfather requires your specialized services immediately. This communication is strictly off the books and completely confidential. Your mother and brother must not know we are speaking. A black car will be waiting outside your building tomorrow morning at exactly 6 a.m. Be downstairs. Tell no one. Theodore Caldwell." I read the words 3 times, letting the sheer magnitude of the message sink in. An off-the-books meeting with the man who controlled the entire family fortune. My grandfather, the tough blue-collar titan who built the empire my mother was currently leveraging, was reaching out to me in secret. He did not want a polite family visit. He specifically requested my professional services. A spark of adrenaline ignited in my chest, pushing back the crushing despair of the eviction notice. I closed the tab for the minimum wage job applications. I did not know exactly what Grandpa Harrison was planning, but looking at the encrypted secure email, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The war was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The black town car was idling by the curb at exactly 6 in the morning. Rain slicked the Chicago streets, reflecting the dull yellow glow of the streetlights. I pulled my wool coat tight against the bitter wind and climbed into the back seat without a word to the driver. The heavy door shut with a solid thud, blocking out the city noise. I sat in the plush leather interior, watching the familiar neighborhoods of Logan Square give way to the sprawling, wealthy enclaves of the northern suburbs. My mind raced with possibilities. Theodore Caldwell was not a man who arranged clandestine early morning pickups for casual family chats. An hour later, the car pulled up to the discreet rear entrance of a highly exclusive private medical facility hidden behind high stone walls and a thick canopy of evergreens. There were no prominent hospital signs, just a sleek metal plaque that read, "The Sterling Care Institute." Mr. Caldwell was waiting under the awning, holding a black umbrella. He wore a crisp gray suit and an expression made of granite. He nodded to me and turned, opening a heavy glass door that led directly to a private elevator. We rode up to the top floor in total silence. When the elevator doors slid open, the sterile smell of antiseptics hit me immediately. We walked down a hushed, carpeted corridor until we reached a set of double doors guarded by a broad-shouldered private security agent. Mr. Caldwell pushed the doors open and motioned for me to step inside. The room was massive, resembling a luxury hotel suite, more than a hospital room, but the medical equipment humming in the corner betrayed its true purpose. Sitting in a leather recliner hooked up to a clear intravenous drip was my grandfather Harrison. He looked thinner than he had at the graduation dinner a year ago. The sharp angles of his cheekbones were more pronounced, and his skin carried a pale grayish tint, but his eyes were exactly the same. They were fierce, calculating, and entirely alert. "Sit down, Justine," he commanded, his voice raspy, but still holding that familiar booming authority. I took a seat on the edge of the sofa across from him, placing my battered briefcase on the floor. "Grandpa, what is going on?" I asked, keeping my tone level despite the anxiety twisting in my gut. "Why are we meeting in secret like this? Because if your mother knew I was in here, she would be measuring the windows for drapes and demanding my power of attorney." "Before the doctor even checked my pulse," he said with a dry, humorless laugh. "I have stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The oncologists give me 3 months if I am lucky, maybe 2. I have kept it completely sealed from the press and strictly hidden from Barbara and Bradley. If those vultures knew I was dying, they would tear my estate apart while my body was still warm." The words hit me like a physical blow. Grandpa Harrison was the only anchor of sanity in our entire bloodline. He was the only one who understood the value of hard work. "I am so sorry," I whispered. "Do not waste our time being sorry," he snapped, though his eyes softened slightly. "I lived a long life. I built a manufacturing empire out of scrap metal in Greece. I spent the 70s standing on freezing factory floors with blistered hands while other men slept. I earned every single penny attached to our family name, and I will be damned if I let an arrogant, spoiled child with a fake tech company flush my legacy down the drain." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I know what happened with Vanguard Capital Partners, Justine. Caldwell has eyes and ears in every major financial firm in this city. I know your mother made that phone call. I know she lied about you to protect Bradley. She essentially destroyed your business to protect his ego." I looked down at my hands, fighting the sting of fresh tears. "It worked," I admitted, my voice tight. "I am facing eviction. I lost my biggest client. She ruined my reputation in a single morning." "Because she is terrified of you," he said flatly. "Barbara has always been terrified of you, Justine. You remind her of the dirt she crawled out of. When I made my first million, your mother thought she was suddenly royalty. She married into country clubs and spent her life trying to wash off the blue-collar grease that built her trust fund. She looks at Bradley and sees the polished, entitled elite she always desperately wanted to be. He has soft hands and smooth words. He looks the part. But you. He pointed a steady finger at me. You are exactly like me. You work for it. You do not whine. You build things from scratch. She punishes you because your very existence reminds her that real wealth requires actual sweat. I absorbed his words, letting them fill the hollow spaces inside my chest. For 33 years, I thought I was simply broken or unlovable. Hearing my grandfather validate my entire reality gave me a sudden, profound surge of strength. Bradley's startup is a complete mirage, I told him, leaning forward. I saw the preliminary financials before Vanguard fired me. OraSync has no real user base and absolutely zero viable revenue streams. He is faking the data. I know, Harrison replied, leaning back against the leather chair. Bradley is a fool playing at being a visionary. But a fool with no money is harmless. A fool with an endless supply of capital is dangerous. Your mother has been moving money around. She thinks she is being clever, but I can see the ripples in the pond. She is quietly liquidating assets. I suspect she is taking out shadow loans against properties she does not fully own to keep his sinking ship afloat. She is trying to buy him enough time to trick a venture capital firm into bailing them out. But I do not trust her liquidity. I think she is leveraging my estate behind my back. What do you want me to do? I asked, my mind already shifting into professional gear, visualizing the financial webs I would need to untangle. I want you to do what you do best, he said, a predatory smile forming on his pale lips. I want you to tear their operation apart. Mr. Caldwell stepped forward, placing a thick, leather-bound folder on the table between us. He opened it, revealing a standard business contract alongside several heavily redacted banking documents. I am officially and legally hiring your forensic accounting firm, Harrison stated, his voice dropping to a serious business-like register. You are no longer operating out of a freezing studio apartment, Justine. Mr. Caldwell has just wired a non-refundable $500,000 retainer from my private offshore account directly into your business account. You have unlimited resources now. I stared at the contract in absolute shock. $500,000. It was enough to save my apartment lease, rent real office space, and buy the most sophisticated auditing software on the market. It was enough to build a fortress. Your mission is simple but dangerous. Harrison continued, his gaze piercing right through me. You are going to conduct a ruthless, completely classified forensic audit of OraSync and Barbara's personal finances. I want every bank statement, every offshore wire transfer, every fake user metric, and every hidden mortgage she has taken out. I want to know exactly how much of my money she has stolen, and exactly how Bradley is faking his company's value. You will follow the money all the way down to the bottom of the ocean. But they will never hand over their books. I pointed out, my analytical brain spotting the immediate roadblock. If I ask for the data, they will block me. They will not know you are looking, Harrison replied. You have the capital now. Hire the right data extraction experts. Buy the server access through third-party vendors. Do whatever it takes, legally or legally adjacent. Caldwell will provide you with the initial account numbers Barbara uses to funnel her allowances. You pull the thread until the entire sweater unravels. I picked up the heavy brass pen resting on top of the contract. If I find what I think I will find, it will destroy them, Grandpa. It will mean federal prison for Bradley. It will mean absolute financial ruin for Mom. Good, he said without a single ounce of hesitation or pity. I built this family wealth with integrity. If they chose to burn it with fraud, they will face the consequences. But I need the undisputed ironclad proof before I die, Justine. I need you to hand me the weapon so I can secure the estate and cut them out permanently before the cancer takes me. If they manage to stall until I am dead, they will contest the will and tie you up in court for decades. We have to strike while I still have breath in my lungs. I looked at the signature line on the contract. My mother had tried to starve me out. She had tried to force me into submission by destroying my livelihood. She thought she had won by dropping a nuclear bomb on my professional reputation. but she had no idea that her actions had just pushed me directly into the arms of the one man with the power to annihilate her. I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my name with a sharp, decisive stroke. I pushed the contract across the table to Mr. Caldwell. "Consider it done," I said, looking back at my grandfather. "I will find every single cent. I will map out the entire fraud scheme. I will bring you the exact matches to the matches they tried to use on me." Harrison smiled, settling back into his chair and closing his eyes. "I knew you were the right choice, Justine. Go to work. Show them what real business looks like." I packed the documents into my briefcase, snapped the latches shut, and walked out of the hospital room. As the private elevator descended to the ground floor, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a notification from my business bank account confirming a deposit of $500,000. The fear and desperation that had suffocated me for the past 3 weeks evaporated instantly, replaced by cold, calculated focus. I stepped out of the clinic and into the pouring Chicago rain, sliding into the back of the waiting town car. "Take me back to the city," I told the driver. "I have a company to tear down." The ultimate collision course was set, and I was holding the steering wheel. The first thing I did with the $500,000 retainer was upgrade my entire digital infrastructure. I moved out of my freezing studio and leased a secure windowless office space in a brutalist building downtown. It was not pretty, but it had thick concrete walls and fiber optic internet speeds that could process massive data dumps in seconds. I bought 3 high-end encrypted servers and hired 2 independent freelance data extraction specialists I trusted implicitly. They were hackers who operated strictly in the gray areas of the financial sector. I paid them double their usual rate in cash and made them sign ironclad non-disclosure agreements. Their job was simple: pierce the corporate veils surrounding my brother's tech startup and pull the raw, unedited financial data directly from their cloud storage. For the next 3 weeks, I practically lived in that concrete bunker. I slept on a stiff cot in the corner and survived on black coffee and cold delivery food. The data dumps started coming in at random hours of the night. Millions of lines of spreadsheets, bank routing numbers, and internal corporate emails flooded my secure servers. I printed everything, pinning the crucial documents to a massive corkboard stretching across the entire back wall of my office. I used red yarn to connect offshore accounts to local shell companies. I was hunting a ghost, and I was not going to stop until I dragged it into the blinding light. The first thread I pulled was AuraSync's user acquisition data. Bradley had presented Vanguard Capital Partners with incredibly impressive metrics, claiming hundreds of thousands of daily active users engaging with his revolutionary digital workspace. But when I bypassed his polished pitch decks and looked at the actual server hosting costs, the math completely collapsed. If he genuinely had the server traffic, he claimed his monthly hosting bills would be astronomical. Instead, they were barely registering. I tasked my extraction specialists with finding out where those users were coming from. The answer was a digital click farm in Eastern Europe. Bradley was paying a few $1,000s a month to generate fake bot traffic, creating a completely fabricated illusion of massive organic growth. The user base did not exist. AuraSync was a ghost town with a shiny front door. But faking user metrics was just standard Silicon Valley arrogance. I needed the actual financial fraud. I needed the money trail. I shifted my focus to the company's operating accounts, and the truth hit me like a freight train. AuraSync was not just a failing tech startup, it was a textbook Ponzi scheme. Bradley had raised $5 million in early seed funding from a group of wealthy angel investors, playing on our family name to secure their trust. He told them the money was for software development and engineering talent. Instead, I traced the capital directly out of the corporate accounts and into a complex web of LLCs registered in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. Those shell companies then funneled the cash right back into Bradley's personal checking accounts. He was using the seed money to pay for his River North penthouse lease, his Porsche payments, his designer suits, and his massive tabs at luxury nightclubs. When the early investors started asking for progress reports or financial returns, Bradley simply used the money he had squeezed out of my mother to pay them fake dividends. He was robbing Peter to pay Paul while bleeding our mother dry to keep the entire house of cards from collapsing. It was pathetic and sloppy, but it was enough to fool people who only looked at the surface. I stepped back from the corkboard, rubbing my burning eyes. I had the proof of wire fraud and investor deception. It was enough to send Bradley to federal prison for a decade. But Grandpa Harrison had explicitly told me to follow the money all the way to the bottom of the ocean. He wanted to know exactly how much Barbara had stolen from his estate to fund this delusion. I opened the secure file containing the bank account routing numbers Mr. Caldwell had provided me. These were my mother's personal accounts, the ones she used for her daily expenses and country club fees. I tracked the massive outbound wire transfers she had been sending to Bradley's shell companies over the past 18 months. The sheer volume of cash was staggering. I had already known she took out secondary mortgages on the family vacation home in Lake Geneva and the suburban estate, but as I calculated the total burn rate, the math once again failed to add up. Bradley was spending money faster than those two mortgages could possibly cover. There had to be a third massive source of liquidity. I dug into the public property records, pulling the deeds and lien histories for every single asset attached to the family name. Nothing stood out until I found a heavily buried commercial loan document filed through a boutique investment bank in New York. It was a massive line of credit for $8 million. I pulled the origination files and my blood ran absolutely freezing cold. The collateral listed for the $8 million loan was Grandpa Harrison's primary manufacturing holding company, the crown jewel of his entire life's work. I frantically cross-referenced the dates on the loan origination. It was signed and executed exactly 4 months ago. At that time, Grandpa Harrison was already undergoing aggressive chemotherapy treatments in total isolation. He had explicitly handed over day-to-day operations to his board of directors, but he had absolutely not authorized any massive leverage against his primary company. I pulled up the digitized signature page of the loan document and zoomed in until the pixels blurred. There, sitting at the bottom of the page, was Harrison's signature, but it was not his signature. I had spent my entire childhood studying my grandfather. I knew the sharp, jagged loops of his handwriting. I knew how he pressed hard on the pen when crossing his T letters. The signature on this loan document was a perfect, flawless tracing. It was too smooth, too precise. It lacked the slight tremor of an 80-year-old man undergoing cancer treatments. I ran the document through a digital forensic signature analysis software I used for corporate embezzlement cases. The program returned a 99% probability of forgery. My mother had not just liquidated her own assets. She had forged my grandfather's signature to secretly leverage his entire manufacturing empire, placing his life's work as collateral to secure an $8 million loan for a fake tech company. If Bradley defaulted on that loan, which he inevitably would since his company generated zero revenue, the bank would foreclose on Harrison's company. Barbara was willing to destroy hundreds of blue-collar jobs and annihilate our family's legacy just to keep my brother from looking like a failure. It was the ultimate profound betrayal. It was not just financial crime, it was familial treason. I spent the next 48 hours without sleeping a single minute. I compiled every bank statement, every fake user metric report, every offshore routing number, and the definitive proof of the forged loan document. I organized it all into a massive, airtight, legally sound dossier. It was a masterpiece of forensic accounting. It was a loaded weapon ready to detonate. I printed 3 hard copies, placing them into thick black binders. I saved the digital files onto heavily encrypted flash drives. I had done exactly what Grandpa Harrison had paid me to do. I had followed the money to the bottom of the ocean, and I had dragged the monsters up to the surface. I looked at the clock on my concrete wall. It was 6 in the morning on a Thursday. The rain was pounding against the roof of my office building. I picked up my cell phone and dialed the secure, unlisted number Mr. Caldwell had provided me for Grandpa Harrison's private hospital room. My heart was pounding with a fierce, victorious rhythm. I had won. I had beaten them at their own game using the exact spreadsheets they had mocked me for. I was going to hand my grandfather the sword he needed to cut them out of the estate permanently. The phone rang 3 times. I paced the floor of my office, clutching one of the black binders to my chest. Finally, the line clicked open. "Grandpa?" I said, my voice breathless with adrenaline. "I have it. I have everything. Bradley is running a massive Ponzi scheme, and Mom forged your signature on an $8 million collateral loan against the manufacturing firm. The dossier is completely finished, and SEC ready. I am bringing it to the hospital right now." There was a heavy, thick silence on the other end of the line. The ambient hum of the hospital room sounded different. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was gone. "Hello?" A woman's voice answered softly. It was not Mr. Caldwell. It was not my grandfather. It was a voice filled with clinical practice sympathy. "Who is this?" I demanded, the adrenaline in my veins suddenly turning to ice. "Where is Harrison? I need to speak to my grandfather right now." "I am so sorry," the nurse said, her voice dropping to a gentle whisper. "You are listed as his emergency secondary contact, but Mr. Caldwell is currently handling the paperwork in the hallway. Harrison passed away 12 minutes ago. His heart simply stopped. He is gone." The heavy black binder slipped from my grasp, hitting the concrete floor with a loud echoing smack. The paper spilled out across my boots. He was gone. The only person in my family who saw me, who respected me, who understood the war I was fighting, had died before I could hand him the weapon. I was standing in a windowless office holding the definitive proof of my mother's ultimate betrayal, and the man who was supposed to execute the justice was dead. I hung up the phone and fell to my knees, gathering the scattered papers with trembling hands. My mother and brother were about to descend on the estate like starving wolves. They thought they had won. They thought the money was theirs to take. They had absolutely no idea what was waiting for them. I shoved the papers back into the binder and wiped the angry tears from my face. I was completely alone again, but this time I was armed. The news of Grandpa Harrison's death hit the public wire less than 2 hours later. My mother moved with the terrifying speed and precision of a military general executing a hostile takeover. By the time I arrived at the hospital to see his body, she had already barred my name from the visitor list. The private security agent standing outside his suite told me Mrs. Barbara had explicitly forbidden anyone but immediate authorized family from entering. When I pointed out that I was his granddaughter, the guard simply looked down at his clipboard and stated that my mother had revoked my clearance using her medical proxy. She was systematically erasing me from the narrative before his body was even cold. The isolation did not stop at the hospital doors. Over the next few days, my mother weaponized her grief, using it as a shield to block my every attempt to be involved. I called the family estate repeatedly, only to be sent directly to a newly hired assistant's voicemail. When I tried to visit the house to pick up a specific tie my grandfather had always wanted to be buried in, the gates were locked shut. The intercom buzzed with the voice of a private security guard who informed me that Barbara had provided a strict list of permitted guests, and my name was nowhere on it. I was his granddaughter, the only person who shared his actual work ethic, and yet I was being treated like a dangerous intruder. My mother was making a very public statement to the entire extended family and all of Harrison's business associates. She was establishing dominance, ensuring everyone knew she was the sole gatekeeper to the family fortune. I received the details of my own grandfather's funeral through a mass generic email sent by her personal assistant just 48 hours before the service. When I arrived at the cathedral on a gloomy Tuesday morning, the exclusion became physical. The ushers directed me not to the front row reserved for immediate family, but to a pew near the very back, usually reserved for distant cousins and corporate acquaintances. The sheer scale of the event was nauseating. There were massive arrangements of white lilies that looked more appropriate for a royal wedding than a funeral. Classical musicians played somber melodies in the corner. I sat there in my black wool coat, watching the people I shared blood with sitting at the front of the church acting out a play for the cameras. Bradley wore a custom-tailored black suit, looking like a movie star playing a grieving relative. Barbara wore a black designer dress with a dramatic veil, dabbing her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief every time a photographer snapped a picture. It was a sickening performance. The eulogies were a complete farce. Barbara stood at the pulpit and delivered a tearful speech about how close she and her father had been, completely ignoring the fact that they despised each other's values. She talked about his legacy and how he had passed his visionary spirit down to his grandson Bradley. She did not mention my name a single time. I was entirely written out of the family history. A few days prior, I had emailed the funeral director asking for 3 minutes to speak about my grandfather. I wanted to talk about his work ethic, his calloused hands, the way he smelled of machine oil and strong coffee, and the quiet lessons he taught me about integrity. The director replied an hour later, stating that Barbara had explicitly threatened to cancel the entire service and pull all funding if I was allowed anywhere near the microphone. She silenced me entirely. I sat in the back row, gripping the handles of my battered briefcase. Inside it rested the black binders containing the forensic audit. It was heavy, holding the absolute destruction of the two people crying fake tears at the altar. I watched them perform their grief, and I felt absolutely nothing but cold, calculating resolve. They thought they had won. They thought the old man had died before he could do anything to stop their rampant greed. They had no idea he had already handed me the detonator. The reception was held at the Oak Brook Country Club, the exact same venue where my mother had humiliated me with a $100 gift card just a year ago. It felt like walking onto a battlefield where the enemy was already celebrating their victory. The private dining room was packed with Chicago elites drinking expensive scotch and eating caviar on my grandfather's dime. The hypocrisy of it all was staggering. Harrison hated caviar. He hated country clubs. But Barbara was using his memorial as a networking event. I stood in the corner, near the heavy oak doors, clutching my briefcase to my chest. I did not eat. I did not drink. I just watched the vultures circle. It did not take long for Bradley to find me. He strutted across the room holding a crystal glass of bourbon, his face flushed with the arrogant glow of unearned wealth. He stopped a few feet away, looking me up and down with intense disgust, as if my sensible dark suit offended his delicate sensibilities. "I am honestly surprised you showed up, Justine," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Mom told security to keep an eye on you. We thought you might try to cause a scene to beg for cash, since your little accounting hobby blew up in your face." I kept my expression entirely neutral. "I came to pay my respects to Grandpa Harrison. That is all." Bradley laughed, a harsh, grating sound that made a few nearby guests turn their heads. "Pay your respects. Please. You are just hovering around hoping some of his money falls into your lap. But you are entirely out of luck. Mom and I spoke to his wealth managers yesterday. The estate is massive, Justine. We are talking generational wealth. Hundreds of millions. And once the probate clears, Orasync is getting a capital injection that will make Vanguard Capital look like a piggy bank. I am going to buy out my competitors. I am taking the company global." He took a slow sip of his bourbon, leaning in closer to me. The smell of the alcohol mixed with his expensive cologne made my stomach turn. "I heard you got an eviction notice on that miserable little studio apartment," he whispered, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "I heard Vanguard fired you because Mom told them you were a mental liability. You should have taken that bookkeeping job I offered you last year. Now you have absolutely nothing. You are a failed accountant standing in a room full of winners. When I get my hands on Grandpa's money, I am going to buy the commercial building your office is in and personally evict you myself. I will make sure you never work in this city again." He was practically vibrating with smugness. He truly believed he was invincible. He thought the $8 million fraudulent loan our mother had taken out against Harrison's manufacturing firm was just a temporary bridge until the inheritance cleared. He thought his fake tech startup with its ghost users and offshore bank accounts was about to become real. He thought he had successfully stolen my grandfather's legacy. "You really think Grandpa left you the keys to the kingdom, Bradley?" I asked, my voice perfectly steady, betraying absolutely none of the explosive secrets I held in my hands. "You think a man who worked 70-hour weeks in a steel factory is going to fund a click farm in Eastern Europe?" Bradley's eyes narrowed slightly, a brief flash of panic breaking through his arrogant facade. He clearly wondered how much I actually knew about his business operations. Then he recovered, his fake smile returning with even more malice. "You are just bitter, Justine. You are a bitter, broke little girl who cannot handle the fact that Mom chose me. She recognized my potential. Grandpa recognized my potential. Enjoy watching me build an empire with his money. Now do us all a favor and leave before Mom has you physically thrown out of the country club. He turned his back on me and walked away, rejoining a group of wealthy investors, laughing loudly at something one of them said. I watched him go, my hands gripping the leather handles of my briefcase so tightly my knuckles turned white. Inside that case was the undeniable proof of his wire fraud. Inside that case was the forensic evidence that our mother had forged Harrison's signature on federal bank documents. They were standing on a trap door and I was holding the lever. I did not cause a scene. I did not yell or throw my drink. I did not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I simply turned around and walked out of the country club, stepping into the damp Chicago evening. The air was freezing, but my mind was burning with absolute focus. I walked to my car, unlocked the door, and placed the heavy briefcase carefully onto the passenger seat. As I put the key in the ignition, my cell phone vibrated in my coat pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the glowing screen. It was a text message routed through a highly secure encrypted server. The sender name was Theodore Caldwell. I opened the message. It contained exactly 2 sentences. The will reading is scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9 sharp in my office. Be there. I stared at the glowing words, reading them over and over again. My grandfather had not died in vain. He had known his time was up, and he had set the final pieces into motion before his heart stopped beating. The audit I had completed was no longer just a weapon for him to use. It was now my shield and my sword. Barbara and Bradley thought they were walking into a coronation tomorrow morning. They thought they were about to be handed the keys to the entire family fortune. They thought I was beaten. I typed a single word back to Mr. Caldwell. Acknowledged. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the country club parking lot, leaving my toxic family behind to celebrate their imaginary victory. The war was coming to their doorstep in less than 12 hours, and they were completely unarmed. The morning sun did nothing to warm the bitter chill of the Chicago wind as I walked through the revolving glass doors of Caldwell and Associates. The law firm occupied the entire 50th floor of a towering skyscraper in the financial district. It was a place constructed of dark mahogany walls, polished marble floors, and absolute silence. It smelled of old money and expensive leather. I walked past the receptionist, handing her my coat and gripping my battered briefcase tightly in my right hand. Inside that briefcase sat the 3 black binders containing the forensic audit, the explosive proof of my brother's Ponzi scheme and my mother's forged $8 million collateral loan. I was early, but I knew they would already be there. I was escorted down a long, hushed corridor toward Theodore Caldwell's primary conference room. Even before the heavy oak doors swung open, I could hear my brother's voice echoing down the hall. He was speaking loudly, entirely too comfortable in a room designed for somber legal proceedings. 20 million is just the floor, Mom. Bradley was bragging, his voice dripping with absolute arrogance. With Vanguard completely out of the picture, we can use Grandpa's liquid capital to self-fund the Series B expansion for Aura Sync. We will not even need outside investors. I am going to buy out our 2 biggest competitors by the 4th quarter. We will take the company public by next spring. I stepped into the conference room. It was a massive space dominated by a long, polished mahogany table. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the gray Chicago skyline. My mother and brother were sitting at the far end of the table, drinking sparkling water from crystal glasses. Barbara wore a sharp black morning suit that looked more suited for a fashion runway than a legal office. Bradley was leaning back in his leather executive chair, scrolling through his phone with a smug, self-satisfied smirk plastered across his face. The moment they saw me enter the room, their conversation stopped dead. The smugness on Bradley's face instantly morphed into a look of profound irritation. "What are you doing here?" Bradley demanded, dropping his phone onto the mahogany table with a loud clatter. "This is a private meeting for actual beneficiaries, Justine. Did you get lost on your way to the temp agency?" My mother let out a sharp, condescending sigh, placing her crystal glass down carefully. Justine, this is highly inappropriate. Mr. Caldwell is a very busy man, and we have an incredible amount of family business to process this morning. We are dealing with a multi-million-dollar estate transition. There is absolutely no reason for you to be hovering around looking for a handout. Grandpa made his feelings about your little accounting hobby perfectly clear when he was alive. You are just wasting your own time. I did not take the bait. I did not raise my voice or defend my presence. I simply walked over to the opposite side of the massive conference table, pulled out a heavy leather chair, and sat down facing them. I placed my battered briefcase squarely on the polished wood in front of me, resting my hands on top of it. I received a formal summons from the executor of the estate. I replied, my voice completely level and stripped of all emotion. I am legally required to be here, Mom. I am sure Mr. Caldwell will explain everything when he arrives. Bradley scoffed, shaking his head as if I were a delusional child. He probably left you a few $1,000s out of pity to pay off your overdue rent, he mocked, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the table. Listen, Justine, since I am about to have a massive influx of operational capital for Orasync, my offer still stands. I can give you a low-level data entry job. You clearly need the charity. Vanguard dropped you. Your reputation in this city is entirely ruined. Take the lifeline before you end up completely homeless. You should listen to your brother, Barbara chimed in, her eyes narrowing with malicious intent. He is being incredibly generous considering the ridiculous stunt you tried to pull at the graduation dinner. He is offering you a way out of the gutter. You would be wise to take it and disappear quietly. I looked at my mother, seeing the desperate, fragile ego hiding just beneath her expensive designer clothes. She thought she had won. She firmly believed she had successfully buried her financial crimes under my grandfather's freshly dug grave. She had absolutely no idea that the very documents proving her federal fraud were sitting exactly 3 feet away from her inside my briefcase. Before I could deliver a response, the heavy oak doors opened again. Theodore Caldwell walked into the room. He carried no briefcase, only a single thin manila folder. His face was a mask of impenetrable stone, offering no pleasantries and no condolences. He walked to the head of the table, sat down, and adjusted his gold-rimmed reading glasses. The room fell into absolute dead silence. Good morning, he stated, his voice carrying the dry, commanding authority of a man who had spent 40 years dismantling corporate empires. We are here to execute the final wishes and testament of Harrison Sterling. As the designated executor of this estate, I will read the directives exactly as they were legally recorded and notarized prior to his passing. There will be no interruptions. Barbara sat up perfectly straight, smoothing out the wrinkles in her black skirt. Bradley practically vibrated with eager anticipation, a hungry, predatory gleam in his eyes. Mr. Caldwell opened the thin manila folder. He bypassed the standard legal boilerplate and cut directly to the tangible assets. To my grandson, Bradley Sterling. Caldwell read, his voice echoing in the quiet room. I leave the physical real estate property located in East Hampton, New York, including the primary residence and all surrounding acreage attached to that specific parcel. Bradley let out a loud, triumphant breath, pumping his fist under the table. He shot me a vicious, victorious glare. That property alone was worth over $10 million on the open market. He was already calculating how fast he could leverage it for his fake tech company. To my daughter, Barbara Caldwell continued, turning to the second page. I leave my entire collection of vintage restored automobiles currently housed in the Chicago climate-controlled facility. The title transfers have already been fully authorized and executed. Barbara smiled, a deep, satisfied smirk crossing her lips. The car collection was legendary among Harrison's business associates, consisting of rare vehicles worth millions at private auction. She nodded graciously toward the attorney, already envisioning the massive checks she would receive from wealthy private collectors. Mr. Caldwell neatly aligned the 2 pieces of paper, placed them back inside the manila folder, and closed it. He took off his gold-rimmed glasses, folded them, and placed them on the mahogany table. That concludes the reading of the last will and testament, he announced, folding his hands together and looking directly at my mother. The silence that followed was suffocating. It took exactly 4 seconds for the reality of his words to register in their brains. Barbara's satisfied smirk vanished instantly, replaced by a look of profound, bewildered confusion. She looked around the room as if expecting another lawyer to jump out of the shadows with a larger stack of documents. "I am sorry, Theodore," she stammered, her voice losing its polished edge. "What do you mean that concludes the reading? You just listed a summer house and some old cars. Where is the rest of it?" Bradley dropped his arrogant posture, sitting up abruptly. "Yeah, wait a minute," he interjected, his face flushing red. "Where are the corporate shares? Where is the liquid cash?" Grandpa had hundreds of millions of dollars tied up in manufacturing holding companies and offshore investment portfolios. "Where is the business capital? You skipped the most important part of the estate." "I skipped absolutely nothing," Mr. Caldwell replied, his voice dropping to a dangerous icy temperature. "The document I just read constitutes the entirety of the assets remaining in your grandfather's legal estate at the exact time of his death." "That is impossible!" Barbara practically screamed, slamming her hands down on the polished wood. "My father built a manufacturing empire. He had massive liquidity. He had commercial real estate. He had corporate bonds. You are his attorney. You know exactly how much money he possessed. Where did it all go? Did you mismanage his accounts? I will have you investigated for malpractice. I will have your law license revoked." Mr. Caldwell did not even blink at her threat. He remained perfectly still, a predator watching a mouse thrash in a trap. Harrison Sterling was a brilliant man, Barbara. He was fully aware of his terminal diagnosis for many months. He was also fully aware of certain unauthorized, highly fraudulent financial activities occurring within his family. Therefore, prior to his passing, he made the strategic decision to execute a massive transfer of his wealth. He created an entirely separate, deeply insulated master holding company. The vast majority of his liquid cash, his corporate shares, and his investment portfolios were legally transferred into that master trust while he was still alive. They are no longer part of this physical estate, therefore they are completely exempt from this will reading. Bradley stood up, his chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. His face was contorted with absolute panic. He needed that liquid cash to cover up his Ponzi scheme. Without it, his entire life was about to collapse. "Who controls the holding company?" Bradley demanded, his voice cracking with desperation. "If the money is in a master trust, who is the beneficiary? Who holds the keys to the accounts, Caldwell? Tell me right now." Mr. Caldwell completely ignored my brother's rising tantrum. He ignored my mother as she began hyperventilating in her chair, her mind undoubtedly racing toward the realization that the $8 million loan she fraudulently took out was now entirely unsupported by the estate she thought she was inheriting. Instead, the seasoned attorney calmly pushed his chair back and stood up. He turned his back on them and walked slowly toward the far wall of the conference room. He pushed aside a large oil painting, revealing a heavy steel wall safe hidden behind it. He dialed in a complex numeric code and pulled the heavy steel door open. Bradley and Barbara watched him in stunned, breathless silence, expecting him to pull out a massive stack of banking documents or a secret secondary will. Mr. Caldwell reached into the safe and retrieved a single thick envelope. It was sealed with heavy red wax, stamped with my grandfather's personal signet ring. He closed the safe and walked back toward the mahogany table. He did not stop at the head of the table. He did not look at my mother. He did not look at my brother. He bypassed them entirely, walking down the length of the long, polished table until he stood directly in front of my chair. Mr. Caldwell looked down at me, his icy demeanor softening into a look of profound respect. He held the heavy wax-sealed envelope out to me. "Your grandfather left very specific instructions, Justine," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the quiet room. "He instructed me to hand this directly to you and no one else. He said you were the only person in this bloodline who truly understands the value of a dollar." I stared at the thick envelope resting in his outstretched hand. My mother let out a strangled, horrified gasp from the other end of the table. I slowly lifted my hands off my battered briefcase and took the envelope from the attorney, breaking the red wax seal. I pulled the heavy parchment flap open, the brittle red wax crumbling into tiny pieces that scattered across the polished mahogany table. Mr. Caldwell remained standing perfectly still beside my chair, Before you review the contents, he said, his voice ringing with absolute clinical finality. Your grandfather instructed me to deliver a very specific message upon the breaking of that seal. He said to Justine, the only one who truly understands the value of $1, I leave the truth. My mother scoffed loudly from the opposite end of the long conference room. The truth she mocked, crossing her arms over her expensive designer morning suit. What does that even mean? Is it a riddle? Harrison was always such a stubborn, theatrical old fool. Just tell us who gets the business accounts, Theodore. We do not have time for this sentimental garbage. I ignored her completely, sliding a thick, heavy stack of legal documents from the envelope. The paper was premium watermarked and heavy with monumental consequence. The very top document was a certificate of incorporation filed in the state of Delaware for an entity named Ironclad Holdings, LLC. I flipped past the title sheet to the second page. It was an executive operating agreement, completely finalized and legally binding. I scanned the dense legal text, searching for the ownership structure. The sole managing director possessing 100% of the voting shares and absolute total executive control was me, Justine Sterling. I blinked, my forensic accountant brain rapidly processing the complex legal jargon. I was not just a beneficiary receiving a standard payout. I was the absolute sole owner of a newly formed master holding company. But a holding company is only as powerful as the assets it physically holds. My hands began to tremble very slightly as I turned to the next section of the thick packet labeled Schedule of Assets. What I saw printed on that page made the breath catch violently in my throat. The first asset legally transferred into Ironclad Holdings was Grandpa Harrison's entire liquid fortune. The offshore private accounts, the highly diversified global investment portfolios, the massive corporate bonds, and the preferred stock in the manufacturing empire. Hundreds of millions of dollars in untethered aggressive capital. It was all there, perfectly categorized and safely locked away inside a corporate entity that I now completely controlled. My grandfather had effectively drained the estate of all its actual monetary power before he died and handed the keys directly to me. But it was the second listed asset that made my heart stop beating completely. It was a promissory note, a massive legally binding debt transfer assignment. I read the routing numbers and the original creditor information printed in stark black ink. My eyes darted across the page rapidly, verifying the dates and the exact financial figures. It was the boutique investment bank located in New York. It was the exact same bank my mother had used to secure the fraudulent $8 million commercial loan against Grandpa Harrison's manufacturing firm. I looked up at Mr. Caldwell, my eyes wide with sudden, staggering comprehension. The seasoned attorney gave me a single, virtually imperceptible nod of confirmation. Grandpa Harrison had not just moved his money to protect it from my mother's greedy grasp. He had used a portion of his vast liquid capital to quietly purchase my mother's debt from the New York Investment Bank. Banks buy and sell commercial debt all the time, completely legally and routinely. Harrison had bought the $8 million loan my mother took out, and he had legally transferred the full ownership of that debt directly into Ironclad Holdings. I looked down at the paper again, letting the sheer, terrifying magnitude of the reality wash over me. I did not just inherit a massive financial fortune. I inherited their absolute financial destruction. Because my mother had forged Harrison's signature on the collateral documents, the loan was entirely unsecured by the estate. Barbara was personally liable for the $8 million, and Bradley, who had accepted the stolen funds into his fake tech startup AuraSync, was legally bound as the secondary guarantor on the corporate accounts. They owed the money, and they owed it to Ironclad Holdings. They owed it to me. I was the bank. I was their primary creditor. I held the absolute legal right to call in the massive debt, to foreclose on their remaining personal assets, and to initiate criminal fraud proceedings the very moment they inevitably defaulted. I held the financial leash to their entire existence in the palm of my hand. My hands began to shake harder, not from fear or anxiety, but from the overwhelming, dizzying rush of absolute unchecked power. For 33 years, my mother had controlled my life by leveraging money and status. She had starved me out. She had ruined my forensic accounting business, and she had tried to force me into submission by cutting off my resources and destroying my reputation. Now, in a stroke of absolute brilliant strategic vengeance, my grandfather had made me the master of her financial universe. I flipped to the very back of the stack. Tucked securely behind the heavy legal contracts was a single piece of standard-lined yellow notebook paper. It was covered in Grandpa Harrison's familiar jagged handwriting. The blue ink was slightly smudged in places, a raw testament to the intense physical pain he must have been enduring while writing it during his final days in the hospital isolation ward. "My dear Justine," the letter began. "If you are reading this, I am gone, and the vultures are likely squawking at the other end of the table. Let them squawk. They have no teeth left. I watched you for years, kid. I watched Barbara try to break your spirit, and I watched you refuse to shatter. You built your business with your own 2 hands, eating cheap noodles and working until your eyes bled. You took the hard road because it was the right road." I felt a hot, stinging tear escape my eye, tracing a rapid path down my cheek. I did not wipe it away. "I knew about Bradley's fake company," the letter continued, "and I knew about Barbara's theft long before I asked you to look into it. I hired you to do the audit because I needed to know if you had the grit to uncover the ugly truth about your own blood. You did. You did not flinch. You proved you have the iron spine required to protect this family's legacy from the parasites trying to drain it dry. The money is yours. The holding company is yours. The debt is yours to collect. Do not show them a single ounce of mercy, Justine. They would never have shown it to you. Make them pay for every lie. I am so damn proud of you. You are the only real Sterling left in this room. Give them hell. Grandpa." A ragged, heavy sob broke loose from deep inside my chest. It tore through the silent mahogany conference room, loud and unmistakable. I pressed my hand tightly over my mouth, my shoulders shaking violently as years of suffocating rejection, toxic anxiety, and pure exhaustion poured out of me. It was not a cry of sorrow or grief. It was the purest, most profound emotional release I had ever experienced in my entire life. For my entire existence, I had been told I was a failure, a massive disappointment, a stubborn mistake who just looked at spreadsheets. I had worked myself to the bone just searching for a single scrap of validation from my family. And here it was. The patriarch of the family, the only man whose opinion actually carried weight, had looked at my life and declared me the sole worthy heir. He had seen my struggle, he had seen my unbending integrity, and he had validated my entire existence from a hospital bed. At the opposite end of the vast conference table, my mother misinterpreted my tears entirely. Her tense, rigid posture instantly relaxed into a stance of victorious, venomous gloating. "Oh, do not start with the theatrics," Justine Barbara said, a cruel, deeply satisfied smile stretching across her perfectly made-up face. "We all knew your grandfather was going to leave you nothing but a sentimental little letter. He was a traditional businessman. He knew the real wealth belonged with Bradley. It is honestly embarrassing to watch you cry over a piece of scrap paper. Did he leave you a few $100s to pay your heating bill?" Bradley let out a booming, arrogant laugh, leaning far back and lacing his fingers behind his head. "I told you, Mom. She got a greeting card and a pat on the back." "Hey, Justine, do not cry too hard. Like I said at graduation, I still have that data entry job open at Aurasync. You can use your little piece of paper to take notes while you fetch my coffee. I will even advance you your first paycheck so you do not get evicted." I lowered my hand from my mouth. The tears stopped instantly. A sudden, chilling, absolute calm descended over my body, wrapping around me like a suit of armor. The crying was done. The grieving for the supportive family I never had was officially permanently over. I carefully folded my grandfather's handwritten letter and tucked it safely into the inner breast pocket of my blazer, pressing it close to my heart. Then I gathered the thick stack of legal documents from Ironclad Holdings. I tapped the bottom edge of the heavy papers against the polished mahogany table, aligning them perfectly. I looked up at my brother and my mother. The reality of the power dynamic shift had fully settled into my bones, turning my spine to absolute steel. I was no longer the scapegoat waiting for their approval. I was the executioner holding the blade. I looked directly at Bradley. His smug grin was still firmly in place, but his eyes were darting nervously between the heavy stack of documents in my hands and Mr. Caldwell. He reached across the table, extending his open palm toward the attorney. "All right, Caldwell, enough with the dramatic pauses," Bradley demanded, snapping his fingers impatiently. "Just give me the keys and the deed to the Hamptons estate. I have a meeting with a real estate broker this afternoon to leverage the property for Aura Sync. Let us wrap this up so I can get back to running an actual business." Mr. Caldwell did not hand him any keys. Instead, he reached into his briefcase and produced a thin red folder, sliding it across the polished wood until it stopped in front of my brother. "That folder contains the deed to the Hamptons estate," Mr. Caldwell stated, his voice completely devoid of any warmth. "However, as the executor of this estate, it is my legal duty to inform you of the exact conditions attached to that specific inheritance." Bradley ripped the folder open, scanning the top document. His eyes scanned the text rapidly. Then they stopped. He blinked heavily, reading the same paragraph over again. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a sick ghost. "What is this?" He choked out, his voice cracking. "This says there is a massive tax lien on the property." "That is correct," Mr. Caldwell replied, adjusting his suit jacket. "Over the past several years, your grandfather deliberately deferred the property taxes on that specific estate. Furthermore, he took out several highly targeted short-term encumbrances against the physical land. The property you just inherited comes with an immediate attached liability of approximately $4.2 million. Because the estate transferred today, those debts are now immediately due and payable in full within 30 days. Bradley jumped to his feet, his chair tipping backward and crashing onto the marble floor. "That is impossible," he shouted. "You cannot inherit debt. That is not how wills work. You inherit the property subject to all attached liens," Mr. Caldwell corrected him with icy precision. "If you cannot pay the $4.2 million within 30 days, the state of New York and the private creditors will seize the property. You cannot leverage it. You cannot sell it. You cannot borrow against it until that lien is completely cleared." Bradley turned to our mother, wild panic consuming his features. "Mom, I need cash. I need $4 million right now to clear the title so I can leverage the house for Aura Sync. If I do not get that capital by next month, the venture capital firms are going to start asking questions about my operational runway." Barbara stood up, smoothing her black designer skirt with trembling hands. She tried to project an aura of calm control, but the sheer terror in her eyes betrayed her. "Calm down, Bradley," she instructed, her voice tight and forced. "We are perfectly fine. I still have the remaining funds from the commercial line of credit I secured last month. We can use that liquidity to clear your tax lien and keep AuraSync moving forward. The bank approved $8 million. We have plenty of runway." That was my cue. I stood up from my chair, picking up the master holding company document. I let the heavy premium paper drop back onto the mahogany table with a loud, resounding slap. "Actually, Mom," I said, my voice slicing through the heavy tension in the room like a perfectly sharpened blade, "you do not have plenty of runway. In fact, you do not have a runway at all." Barbara snapped her head toward me, her face twisting with pure visceral hatred. "Keep your mouth shut, Justine," she hissed. "This is high-level finance. You do not understand anything about commercial lines of credit. I understand that you forged Grandpa Harrison's signature to secure an $8 million loan against his manufacturing firm," I stated cleanly and clearly. The air in the room was instantly sucked out. Barbara froze, completely paralyzed. Bradley stopped breathing. They stared at me as if I had just morphed into a terrifying monster right in front of their eyes. "I know you have been funneling that money into offshore shell companies to fund Bradley's fake user metrics." I continued, taking a slow, deliberate step toward the center of the table. "I tracked every single penny. I know AuraSync is a massive Ponzi scheme, and more importantly, Grandpa Harrison knew it too." "You are lying," Barbara whispered, her voice shaking violently. "You are a jealous, unstable liar. I will have you arrested for defamation." I slid the master operating agreement for Ironclad Holdings across the table, pushing it directly into her line of sight. "Read it," I commanded. Read the legal owner of the debt you took out. Barbara leaned forward, her eyes scanning the heavy, bold text. I watched her lips move silently as she read the name of the master trust and the assigned creditor. Then she read the name of the sole managing director, possessing absolute executive control. Justine Sterling. It took a few agonizing seconds for her brain to process the catastrophic reality of her situation. Grandpa Harrison bought your debt. I explained, my voice devoid of any pity or mercy. He purchased the $8 million commercial loan you took out from the New York Investment Bank. And then he legally transferred the full ownership of that exact debt into Ironclad Holdings. Bradley grabbed the edge of the table, his knuckles turning stark white. What does that mean, Mom? He demanded, his voice rising to a frantic pitch. What is she talking about? It means I own your debt, Bradley, I answered, looking directly into his panicked eyes. Mom forged the collateral documents, which means the loan is completely unsecured by the family estate. She is personally liable for the $8 million. And since you accepted those stolen funds into your corporate accounts, you are the secondary guarantor. You both owe $8 million, and you owe it directly to me. Barbara let out a sound that I had never heard a human being make before. It was a guttural, primal shriek of absolute mind-bending terror and rage. It sounded like an animal caught in a brutal steel trap. The pristine, polished facade she had spent her entire life cultivating completely shattered into a million jagged pieces. She lost her mind. You little rat, she screamed, her face contorting into a mask of pure madness. You stole it. You manipulated a dying old man. You poisoned him against us. She lunged across the massive mahogany conference table, her manicured hands outstretched like claws, aiming directly for my throat. She knocked over crystal glasses and pitched forward, scrambling over the polished wood to reach me. I did not even flinch. I stood my ground, watching her thrash in wild, uncontrolled desperation. Mr. Caldwell pressed a hidden button under the edge of his desk. Less than 2 seconds later, the heavy oak doors burst open. 2 massive private security agents rushed into the room. They grabbed Barbara by her shoulders, yanking her forcefully off the table and dragging her backward. "Let me go!" she shrieked, kicking her expensive designer heels wildly in the air. "She is stealing my family legacy. She is an ungrateful, vicious parasite." The guards pinned her arms behind her back, holding her securely against the far wall of the conference room. Bradley stood frozen, too cowardly to intervene, too shocked to even move. "Justine, sign that company over to me right now," Barbara demanded, her chest heaving as she struggled against the security agents. "You owe me. I gave you life. I put a roof over your head. You are destroying this family. You are tearing your own blood apart out of pure spite. Hand over the holding company. Do it right now, or I swear I will ruin you." I looked at the woman who had spent 33 years trying to crush my spirit. I looked at the mother who had humiliated me, laughed at my struggles, and actively tried to destroy my professional reputation just weeks ago. I felt absolutely nothing for her. No anger, no sadness, only the cold, hard clarity of justice. "You destroyed this family, Mom," I said, my voice echoing cleanly through the massive room. "You burned it down the second you forged Grandpa's name. You made your bed. Now you can lie in it. And regarding my company," I smiled, a slow, dangerous smile, "the answer is absolutely no. I am calling the debt due immediately upon default. Go earn your own way out." Mr. Caldwell gestured sharply to the security guards. "Escort them entirely off the premises," he ordered. "If they resist, call the local authorities and have them arrested for trespassing." The guards began forcefully marching my mother toward the door. She was sobbing now, weeping loud, ugly tears of absolute defeat. She dragged her feet, begging Mr. Caldwell to reconsider, pleading with him to call the judge. He completely ignored her, gathering his legal files with practiced efficiency. As the guards pushed Bradley toward the exit, he dug his heels into the carpet, stopping just at the threshold of the heavy oak doors. He turned back to look at me. The panic in his eyes had been replaced by a cornered, desperate malice. He pointed a trembling finger in my direction. "You think you won, Justine?" he sneered, his voice shaking with venomous rage. "You think a piece of paper means anything in the real world? We will drag you through the courts for decades. We will drown you in so much litigation you will not be able to afford a cup of coffee. We will bleed you dry until you are bankrupt and completely homeless. You are absolutely dead to us. I picked up the black binder containing my forensic audit. I patted the cover gently, looking right into my brother's terrified eyes. I am the bank, Bradley, I replied coldly. I have unlimited capital and I have the absolute truth. Bring on the lawyers. The security guards shoved him out into the hallway, and the heavy oak doors slammed shut, locking with a definitive final click. The storm was officially raging, but I was standing in the absolute center of it, holding all the thunder. The heavy oak doors of Mr. Caldwell's office had barely clicked shut before the absolute reality of war set in. Caldwell looked at me from across the mahogany table, warning me that a cornered animal is the most dangerous kind of predator. He was entirely right. Bradley and Barbara did not waste a single second licking their wounds or contemplating the gravity of their financial crimes. Within 48 hours, I was ambushed by process servers the moment I stepped outside my apartment building. Two men in dark windbreakers shoved thick, heavy stacks of legal complaints directly into my chest before speeding away in an unmarked sedan. I stood on the freezing Chicago sidewalk, reading the bold black print of the injunctions. Bradley was not bluffing about the litigation. They had officially filed a massive, frivolous lawsuit in probate court, actively contesting the creation and legality of ironclad holdings. The narrative they spun in those legal documents was pure, venomous fiction. They formally claimed that Grandpa Harrison was a severely senile old man suffering from extreme, undocumented cognitive decline during his final months in the hospital. They alleged that I, the estranged, manipulative, and vindictive granddaughter, had swooped in during his final vulnerable days to emotionally coerce him into signing away his vast estate. They painted me as a ruthless, predatory opportunist who weaponized my forensic accounting background to draft highly confusing legal documents specifically designed to trick a dying man out of his fortune. It was a completely baseless, disgusting lawsuit, but in the corporate legal world, frivolous does not mean harmless. It meant incredibly expensive. It meant aggressively dragging my name through months of grueling discovery hearings, mandated mediation, and hostile depositions designed entirely to bleed my resources dry and break my psychological resolve. But I had unlimited capital now, and Mr. Caldwell's elite firm was already filing aggressive motions to dismiss, backed by the airtight independent medical evaluations Harrison had strategically secured before his death. Barbara knew she could not win on legal merit alone, so she immediately weaponized the court of public opinion. She mobilized her entire extensive network of wealthy socialites, country club executives, and desperate sycophants. Suddenly, anonymous sources began leaking highly damaging, entirely fabricated stories to the local business journals and financial blogs. A prominent Chicago financial news website published a scathing viral exposé titled "The Predator Accountant." The article heavily implied that my boutique forensic accounting firm was actually an elaborate front for corporate extortion. They suggested I used aggressive auditing tactics to blackmail vulnerable small businesses, and that my recent acquisition of a massive family trust was the ultimate culmination of my elder abuse strategies. They interviewed unnamed family friends who talked extensively about my alleged history of severe mental instability, deliberately referencing my college dropout phase as definitive proof of my erratic, dangerous behavior. Barbara was pulling out every single stop, orchestrating an absolute masterclass in character assassination. She wanted to make me entirely radioactive in the financial district. She wanted to ensure that no legitimate business would ever hire me again, systematically isolating me from the very industry I had bled for years to break into. The hit pieces circulated rapidly across professional social media platforms, with Bradley sharing them directly from his verified executive accounts, adding hypocritical captions about seeking justice and protecting vulnerable seniors from financial predators. The professional fallout was immediate and absolutely brutal. My secure office phones began ringing incessantly, but it was not new business inquiries. It was sheer, unadulterated panic. The handful of loyal mid-level clients I had managed to retain after the Vanguard Capital disaster began pulling their contracts one by one. A local logistics company I was currently auditing for internal theft called to cancel our active retainer, citing a sudden, unexplained shift in their management priorities. The tone of their corporate legal counsel was extremely cold, effectively confirming they had read the malicious smear pieces and wanted zero association with my agency. By the end of the week, my active client roster had evaporated entirely. The isolation was suffocating and heavy. I sat in my concrete bunker staring at the cancellation emails pouring endlessly into my secure inbox. My mother was systematically burning my professional village to the ground, trying to starve me out, just like she had tried to do before. But this time she was doing it on a massive public scale, ensuring my name was synonymous with fraud. As I was boxing up the last of my physical client files, preparing to archive them, my personal cell phone buzzed loudly on the metal desk. The caller ID displayed my father's name. Thomas Sterling was a man who had spent his entire marriage living quietly and comfortably in Barbara's overbearing shadow. He was a classic passive enabler who always preferred to look the other way rather than confront his wife's blatant cruelty. He had never defended me when she mocked my career choices, and he had remained completely silent when she threw me out of the house all those years ago. I stared at the ringing phone, seriously debating whether to answer it at all. A small, foolish part of my inner child hoped he was calling to apologize, or to offer some shred of paternal support in the midst of this orchestrated media circus. Against my better judgment, I swiped the screen and accepted the call. "Justine, thank God you finally answered," my father said, his voice sounding incredibly tired and severely strained. "I have been trying to reach you all day long." "Dad," I replied, keeping my emotional guard firmly in place. "What do you want? Please tell me you are not calling to threaten me with more baseless lawsuits." "No, no lawsuits!" He sighed heavily into the receiver, a sound of profound exhaustion. "I am calling to ask you to end this absolute madness. Your mother is completely hysterical, Justine. She has not slept in days. Bradley is threatening to do something drastic if he loses Aurasync to this debt collection. The family is tearing itself apart." The sheer absurdity of his statement made my blood boil hot in my veins. The family tore itself apart when Mom deliberately forged Grandpa's signature to secure an $8 million loan. I shot back, my voice raising in the empty office. The family tore itself apart when Bradley decided to run a massive Ponzi scheme and steal from his investors. I did not do this to them, Dad. They did this to themselves. I am just holding the mirror up to their crimes. I know your mother made some highly questionable financial decisions. He pleaded, his tone entirely placating and soft. But you have to understand the extreme pressure she was under. She just wanted Bradley to succeed and secure his future. You have your own business, Justine. You have always been so capable and fiercely independent. You do not need this master holding company or this massive debt. Just sign the assets over to Bradley to keep the peace. Let them have the estate, and we can all move on from this terrible nightmare. I can talk to your mother about issuing a public retraction for those awful articles. We can fix your professional reputation. Just give them the money and let it go." I gripped the cold metal edge of my desk, my knuckles turning stark white under the fluorescent lights. He was not calling to support me. He was not calling because he cared about the destruction of my reputation. He was calling to negotiate my unconditional surrender. He was asking me to reward their federal crimes and validate their lifelong abuse just so he did not have to deal with his wife's screaming tantrums in his own house. He wanted me to hand over the loaded weapon Grandpa Harrison had trusted me with so he could go back to playing golf and ignoring reality. The realization hit me with absolute staggering clarity. My father's passive compliance was just as toxic as Barbara's active cruelty. He was the ultimate enabler, perfectly willing to sacrifice his daughter's sanity and rightful inheritance on the altar of fake family harmony. Keeping the peace to him just meant letting the abusers win so he could have a quiet evening. "You are asking me to fold, Dad?" I said, my voice dropping to a low, incredibly dangerous whisper. You are asking me to sign away my grandfather's legacy to a verified criminal just so you do not have to listen to Mom scream at you. You watched them abuse me for 33 years, and you never said a single word in my defense. And now when I finally have the power to stop them, you want me to hand them the gun. Justine, please, he begged, desperation creeping into his tone. You are destroying the family. I am excising the rot, I corrected him sharply. And you are part of it. Do not ever call this number again. I ended the call and immediately blocked his contact in my phone. I blocked my mother. I blocked my brother. I went through my directory and systematically blocked every single extended family member who had ever stood by and watched them tear me down. I severed every remaining emotional tie to the people who shared my blood. The isolation was now absolute and total. I was completely alone in my concrete office building, stripped of my clients smeared viciously in the press, and estranged from my entire family. But as I stood in the silence of my bunker, I did not feel fear. I felt a terrifying, liberating sense of absolute purpose. They had pushed me into a corner and stripped away everything I had to lose. They thought total isolation would break me and force me to hand over ironclad holdings. They had absolutely no idea that isolation was my natural habitat. I walked over to the massive corkboard covering my office wall, the one detailing every single fraudulent transaction Bradley and Barbara had ever made. I locked the heavy steel deadbolt on my office door. The defensive phase was officially over. It was time to prepare for absolute total war. I did not waste a single second responding to the vicious hit pieces or the fabricated media circus my mother had orchestrated. Public relations battles are for people who rely on public opinion to survive. I was a forensic accountant. I operated entirely in the realm of undisputed mathematics and hard, undeniable facts. They wanted to drag me into a chaotic, emotional mudslinging contest in the local business journals. I was going to drag them into a federal courtroom. The frivolous lawsuit Barbara and Bradley filed in probate court was intended to drain my resources and force me into submission. They fundamentally misunderstood how the legal discovery process worked when your opponent is your primary creditor. I called Mr. Caldwell the morning after I blocked my father. The seasoned attorney answered on the first ring, expecting me to be in a state of absolute panic over the latest defamatory articles circulating on the financial blogs. Instead, I gave him a direct clinical order. I told him to lean entirely into their ridiculous lawsuit, because Bradley and Barbara had formally contested the legitimacy of Ironclad Holdings and the transfer of the $8 million debt. They inadvertently opened the door to aggressive legal discovery. As the legal owner of the master holding company and the primary creditor holding the note, I had absolute, undeniable standing to demand total transparency regarding the operational health and financial viability of the secondary guarantor. That guarantor was Bradley's tech startup, AuraSync. Mr. Caldwell smiled through the phone, recognizing the brilliance of the maneuver immediately. We drafted a massive, highly invasive subpoena demanding direct, unfiltered access to AuraSync's entire internal server network. We requested every single email, every Slack message, every bank routing number, and every line of raw user data for the past 24 months. Bradley's legal team fought the subpoena with absolute desperate ferocity. They filed emergency motions to quash, claiming we were engaging in a hostile corporate fishing expedition. But the judge presiding over the civil case took one look at the $8 million commercial loan document and granted our subpoena in full. The law was entirely on my side. If you owe someone $8 million, they have the right to see your books. Bradley's lawyers eventually handed over the server data, believing they had successfully sanitized the hard drives. They assumed I was just a mid-level bookkeeper who would look at the polished spreadsheets they provided and give up. They severely underestimated the digital arsenal I had built in my concrete bunker. I brought my 2 freelance data extraction specialists back into the office. I doubled their cash rate and told them to bypass the superficial ledgers entirely. We spent the next 72 hours locked in the windowless room, ripping through the digital architecture of Bradley's fake empire. We pulled the deleted files, the shadow servers, and the hidden communication channels his amateur tech team thought they had permanently erased. The data we recovered was not just incriminating, it was a goldmine of systemic federal fraud. I cross-referenced the raw server data with the forensic audit I had already completed for Grandpa Harrison. The puzzle pieces locked together with devastating, terrifying precision. I found the exact email threads where Bradley instructed his lead developers to actively spoof Internet Protocol addresses to fabricate daily active user metrics. I found the direct messages where he laughed with his fraternity buddies about using early seed investor money to pay the lease on his River North penthouse. The arrogance was staggering. He had documented his own federal wire fraud in writing, believing he was entirely untouchable. But the absolute crown jewel of the digital extraction, the piece of evidence that sealed their absolute destruction, was found hidden in the metadata of the $8 million commercial loan application. I traced the digital footprint of the forged signature page. The exact timestamp and Internet Protocol address proved that the document was digitally signed and uploaded from a private wireless network located inside Barbara's suburban estate. I had the undeniable technological proof that my mother was sitting in her own living room when she committed federal bank fraud and forged my grandfather's name. I stood in front of my massive corkboard connecting the final pieces of red yarn. The picture was complete. It was an airtight, legally flawless masterpiece of forensic evidence. I had the offshore bank accounts, the fabricated user data, the wire fraud, and the forgery. I had everything required to put my own blood relatives behind bars for a very long time. Mr. Caldwell arrived at my secure office later that evening. I walked him through the entire dossier page by page, data point by data point. The seasoned attorney sat in stunned silence as the sheer magnitude of the criminal enterprise was laid bare before him. When I finished the presentation, he closed the heavy black binder and looked up at me with profound respect. "We take this directly to the probate judge tomorrow morning," Mr. Caldwell stated, his voice sharp with determination. "We use this to have their frivolous lawsuit dismissed with extreme prejudice. We immediately foreclose on the commercial debt, seize their remaining personal assets, and bankrupt them in civil court. The estate will be completely protected. You have won, Justine." I looked at the black binders sitting on my metal desk. A civil victory would simply mean they lose the money. It would mean they file for bankruptcy, cry to their wealthy friends about how their vindictive daughter ruined them, and continue living their toxic lives playing the victims. A civil judgment was not enough. I did not just want to protect the estate. I wanted to execute the mandate my grandfather had left me. He told me to give them hell. "We are not taking this to the probate judge," I replied, my voice cold and absolute. "A civil court will just slap them with fines they cannot pay and force them into bankruptcy. Bradley is actively gearing up to scam a new set of victims. If we shut him down in civil court, he might escape the criminal element entirely. He will just find a new mark and start over." Mr. Caldwell narrowed his eyes, studying my face. "What exactly are you proposing, Justine?" "I am proposing an absolute scorched earth tactical strike," I answered. "We are not just going to defend Ironclad Holdings. We are going to permanently dismantle their entire operation." I explained my strategy. I was not going to hand the evidence over in a quiet civil hearing. I was going to package the entire dossier specifically for the federal authorities and the exact people Bradley was trying to scam next. I knew Bradley was frantically trying to secure a massive Series B funding round to cover the missing $8 million. He was out there pitching his fake company to new venture capital firms, trying to lure them into his Ponzi scheme to save himself from my debt collection. I spent the next 24 hours restructuring the raw data. I removed any confusing accounting jargon and distilled the evidence into a razor-sharp, devastatingly clear narrative of corporate fraud and embezzlement. I created a weaponized SEC-ready dossier that a first-year federal investigator could understand in 5 minutes. It was perfectly indexed, cross-referenced, and supported by undeniable digital forensics. On a quiet, rainy Thursday morning, I left my concrete bunker carrying a heavy leather briefcase. I did not make a dramatic scene. I did not call the press or post on social media. I simply drove my car to the federal building in downtown Chicago. Mr. Caldwell had utilized his extensive network to arrange a private off-the-books meeting with a senior investigator at the Securities and Exchange Commission, as well as a contact within the local financial crimes task force. I sat in a sterile gray interview room, handing over the encrypted flash drives and the hard copy binders. The federal agents asked me targeted specific questions about my methodology and the data extraction process. I answered them with clinical precision, providing the legal framework of the subpoena that granted me access to the servers. I watched their eyes widen as they reviewed the initial summary of the wire fraud and the fabricated user metrics. They recognized a slam-dunk federal case when it was handed to them on a silver platter. I left the federal building an hour later, stepping back out into the gray Chicago morning. I did not look back. The trap was officially set. The explosive dossier was now in the hands of the authorities. I had quietly slipped a ticking time bomb directly under Bradley and Barbara's carefully constructed house of cards. They were entirely oblivious, still operating under the delusion that they were fighting a simple probate battle against an estranged relative. They had absolutely no idea that the federal government was now quietly building a criminal indictment against them, using the exact evidence I had curated. I drove back to my secure office, feeling a profound sense of absolute calm settle over my body. The hardest part of the war was over. The evidence was secured. The authorities were mobilized. Now all I had to do was wait for the timer to reach 0. I knew my mother and brother would not go quietly. I knew their arrogant desperation would drive them to make one final, massive public push to save their dying empire. They would try to secure their new funding and pay me off to make me disappear. And when they did, I would be standing right there in the front row, watching the entire explosion. The waiting period was a masterclass in absolute psychological discipline. I had handed the federal authorities the exact blueprint of my family's criminal enterprise, and now I simply had to sit in the quiet sanctuary of my concrete office and wait for the trap to spring shut. I monitored the financial news feeds and the local Chicago business journals with clinical detachment. I knew Bradley and Barbara were cornered animals, and I knew they would not go down quietly. They were entirely oblivious to the federal investigation quietly building behind closed doors. They still believed they were fighting a localized civil battle over a disputed estate and a called-in commercial loan. Their profound arrogance blinded them to the reality of their impending destruction. Bradley responded to the pressure exactly the way a desperate narcissist always responds. He doubled down on the grand illusion. He needed $8 million in liquid cash to satisfy the debt held by Ironclad Holdings and prevent me from foreclosing on his entire life. But since he had absolutely no actual revenue and no legitimate business model, he decided to do what he always did. He decided to steal it from someone else. He launched a massive, highly aggressive public relations campaign, announcing a Series B funding round for Aurus Inc. Press releases flooded the digital tech blogs proclaiming that his revolutionary digital workspace platform was seeking $20 million from elite angel investors and venture capital firms to facilitate a massive global expansion. It was a staggering display of unadulterated financial delusion. Bradley genuinely believed he could host a glamorous party charm, a room full of wealthy investors, with fabricated user metrics, secure a $20 million capital injection, and quietly siphon off $8 million to pay his debt to me. He thought he could launder new investor money to cover the tracks of his previous fraud. He did not realize he was just actively adding dozens of new felony wire fraud charges to his rapidly expanding federal indictment. He rented out the Grand Ballroom at the Palmer House, one of the most historic and obscenely expensive luxury venues in downtown Chicago. He hired premium caterers, live entertainment, and a professional media team to document his triumphant return to the top of the financial food chain. He was leveraging the absolute last scraps of his mother's remaining credit lines to throw a multi-million-dollar party designed entirely to save his own skin. I watched the spectacle unfold from a distance, feeling a cold sense of anticipation settling deep into my bones. And then the invitation arrived. I was walking out of my secure office building on a brisk Tuesday afternoon, my hands stuffed into the pockets of my wool coat. As I approached the parking garage, a sleek black town car idled by the curb. The tinted back window slowly rolled down, revealing my mother sitting in the plush leather interior. Barbara looked immaculate, her hair perfectly blown out, her posture rigid with an artificial sense of absolute superiority. She had explicitly gone out of her way to track my physical movements just to ensure she could deliver this message in person. She signaled to her private driver, who stepped out of the vehicle holding a thick, heavy envelope made of premium midnight black cardstock. He walked over and extended it toward me. I did not break eye contact with my mother as I reached out and took the envelope from his hands. "Open it," Barbara commanded, her voice carrying clearly through the crisp city air. "I want to see your face when you realize exactly how badly you have miscalculated this entire situation." I slid my finger under the gold foil flap and pulled out the invitation. It was a lavish, beautifully embossed ticket to the Aura Sync Series B funding gala. Tucked behind the thick cardstock was a piece of personalized stationery featuring my mother's elegant, sweeping handwriting. I read the short, deliberate note silently to myself. It said, "Come see how real business is done. Prepare to be bought out." I looked up from the note, my expression entirely devoid of any reaction. Barbara was staring at me with a desperate, hungry intensity. She wanted to see fear. She wanted to see me crumble under the realization that they were about to secure $20 million and use it to permanently silence me. She firmly believed that buying out the debt would erase her forgery and validate her lifelong narrative that Bradley was a winner and I was just an envious obstacle they could effortlessly pay to go away. "We are securing $20 million on Friday night, Justine," my mother stated, a vicious, triumphant smile spreading across her face. "Bradley has commitments from 3 major investment groups. The moment the capital clears, we are going to write a check to your little holding company and sever all ties with you permanently. You thought you could trap us, but you just motivated us to reach the next level of success. I highly suggest you attend the gala. It will be an excellent educational experience for you to witness what real visionary leadership looks like." She rolled the tinted window up without waiting for my response, signaling the driver to pull away from the curb. I stood on the sidewalk watching the town car disappear into the heavy Chicago traffic, holding the black and gold invitation in my hand. I did not feel intimidated. I did not feel outmaneuvered. I felt an overwhelming, chilling sense of absolute certainty. The sheer arrogance required to invite the primary creditor, holding the proof of your federal crimes, to the exact location where you plan to commit your next federal crime, was staggering. They were not inviting me to a celebration. They were inviting me to their own execution. And they wanted me in the front row. I walked back into my building and immediately contacted Mr. Caldwell. I informed him about the gala and the $20 million funding attempt. The seasoned attorney simply chuckled softly through the encrypted phone line, confirming that the federal agents were already fully aware of the event. The trap was perfectly primed. The authorities were just waiting for Bradley to step onto that stage and actively solicit funds across state lines using the fabricated financial documents. The moment he made the pitch, the federal crime would be actively in progress, securing an airtight, unquestionable conviction. I accepted the invitation. I was not going to miss this event for anything in the world. But I was not attending as a defeated sister or a bought-out creditor. I was attending as the final executioner of Grandpa Harrison's unyielding mandate. He had told me to give them hell, and I was going to deliver it to them on a silver platter. The preparation for the gala became a highly deliberate ritual. I was not going to walk into the Palmer House wearing the sensible discount suits I had relied on during my grueling startup years. I was not going to hide in the shadows or blend into the background. I was going to walk into the lion's den radiating absolute, undeniable power. I took an afternoon off and visited an exclusive bespoke boutique in the Gold Coast district. I did not use a single penny from Ironclad Holdings or my grandfather's vast estate. I pulled out the sleek metal corporate card tied directly to my own forensic accounting firm. I paid for my armor using the money I had earned through 80-hour weeks, relentless grinding, and uncompromising integrity. I purchased a stunning, razor-sharp tailored suit in a deep, rich charcoal gray, lined with striking crimson silk. It was a masterpiece of architectural clothing, featuring strong, structured shoulders and a silhouette that commanded instant respect. It was not a dress designed for a socialite attending a party. It was a uniform designed for a professional dismantling an empire. I paired it with sleek, minimalist heels and subtle, elegant jewelry. When I looked at myself in the full-length mirror, I did not see the discarded scapegoat of the Sterling family. I saw a lethal, highly calibrated weapon. I saw exactly who I had fought so desperately to become. The night of the gala arrived with a sharp, freezing wind blowing off Lake Michigan. The sky over Chicago was a deep, bruised purple, setting a dramatic backdrop for the events about to unfold. I drove my own car to the Palmer House, pulling up to the grand, historic entrance. The street was lined with luxury vehicles, flashing camera lights, and a red carpet rolled out for the city's financial elite. Bradley had truly spared no expense trying to project the ultimate illusion of massive corporate success. I handed my keys to the valet and stepped out into the freezing night air. The bitter wind caught the edges of my charcoal coat, but I did not shiver. I felt an intense burning heat radiating from my core. I walked up the marble steps of the hotel, moving with a slow, deliberate cadence. I ignored the photographers and the wealthy socialites crowding the lobby. I navigated the gilded hallways with absolute singular focus, my mind perfectly clear and entirely devoid of hesitation. I reached the massive, ornate double doors of the grand ballroom. I could hear the loud, pulsating energy of the crowd inside, the clinking of champagne glasses and the low hum of heavy networking. Behind those doors, my mother and brother were reveling in their manufactured glory, waiting to parade their stolen wealth in my face. They thought they had backed me into a corner. They thought they were the apex predators in the room. I reached out and pushed the heavy brass handles open, stepping directly into the blinding light of the ballroom, completely ready to show them how real business is actually done. The grand ballroom of the Palmer House was a glittering sea of extreme wealth and misplaced confidence. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden light over dozens of tables draped in black silk. Waiters in pristine white jackets circulated with silver trays of expensive champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres. I stood just inside the heavy brass handles, letting the sheer magnitude of the illusion wash over me. It was a masterpiece of corporate theater designed specifically to separate smart people from their money. It took exactly 30 seconds for my mother to spot me. Barbara was holding court near the front stage, laughing with a group of older men who looked distinctly like heavy-hitting venture capitalists. The moment her eyes locked onto my charcoal suit, the fake smile melted completely off her face. She excused herself with a tight, jerky movement and marched directly toward me, signaling two large event security guards along the way. Her designer heels clicked aggressively against the polished marble floor of the foyer. "What do you think you are doing here?" she hissed. Her voice kept low to avoid a public scene, but trembling with poorly concealed rage. "I told you to prepare to be bought out, not to crash a private corporate event. You are trespassing, Justine. Get out before I have you thrown into the street." I did not move a single inch. I squared my shoulders and looked down at her. "I received an invitation, Mom. I am just here to watch real business being done exactly as your little note suggested." The two security guards flanked my mother, looking at me with stern professionalism. "Ma'am," the taller guard said, stepping forward, "this is a closed private event. If you are not on the approved investor guest list, we need to ask you to leave the premises immediately." Barbara smirked, crossing her arms over her chest. "Escort her out right now. She is a disgruntled relative trying to cause a disturbance." I reached into the inner breast pocket of my blazer and pulled out a single sheet of heavy legal paper. It was a certified notarized letter from Theodore Caldwell, complete with a federal court seal. I handed it directly to the security guard, completely bypassing my mother. "I am the sole managing director of Ironclad Holdings," I stated, my voice ringing with absolute, unshakable authority. Ironclad Holdings is the primary secured creditor of Orasync. Under federal corporate law and the specific terms of the commercial debt my mother fraudulently secured, I have an absolute legal right to be present at any formal shareholder or investor presentation regarding the financial status of this company. If you attempt to remove me, you will be actively obstructing a primary creditor, and my legal team will hold this venue entirely liable for corporate interference. The guard read the document, his eyes widening slightly at the official seals and the highly aggressive legal language. He recognized a federal mandate when he saw one. He handed the paper back to me and stepped aside, backing away from my mother. My apologies, Ms. Sterling. Please enjoy the presentation. Barbara looked like she had just been slapped across the face with a brick. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She glared at the guards, realizing she had absolutely no power to throw me out of the room. "Take a seat, Mom," I said coldly, looking right through her. "The show is about to start." I walked past her and took a seat near the very back of the room, positioning myself where I had a clear, unobstructed view of the entire ballroom and the stage. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn shut. The lights dimmed, and high-energy electronic music began to pulse through the massive surround sound speakers. Bradley jogged onto the stage wearing a black turtleneck and an arrogant, practiced smile. He looked exactly like every Silicon Valley grifter who thought a good jawline and a confident strut could substitute for a viable business model. The massive digital screens behind him flared to life, displaying the sleek, completely hollow AuraSync logo in bright neon colors. "Welcome to the future of digital synergy," Bradley announced, pacing the stage with a wireless microphone. For the next 40 minutes, I watched my twin brother spin an absolute masterpiece of corporate fiction. He clicked through slides showing explosive exponential growth charts that went up and to the right in a perfect, impossible diagonal line. He talked about seamless integration, cloud-based architectural shifting, and revolutionary user engagement platforms. He threw out massive, staggering numbers with the practiced ease of a career con artist. He claimed AuraSync had captured 500,000 daily active users in the last quarter alone. He projected $70 million in gross recurring revenue by the end of the next fiscal year. The investors in the room were eating it up. I watched the venture capitalists nodding, taking notes on their tablets, their eyes shining with the promise of early-stage tech wealth. Bradley was selling them a ghost, and they were completely ready to write $20 million worth of checks to buy it. He spoke about shifting paradigms and disrupting the modern workspace, hiding his complete lack of a product behind thick layers of meaningless corporate jargon. "We are not just building software," Bradley concluded, pausing dramatically and looking out into the breathless audience. "We are building an ecosystem, and tonight we are opening the door for elite partners to join us on this journey. We are seeking a $20 million Series B injection to take AuraSync global." The room erupted into thunderous applause. My mother was standing near the front row, clapping enthusiastically, her eyes gleaming with the desperate, hungry hope that her crimes were about to be erased by a massive influx of stolen capital. Bradley stood on stage, soaking in the adoration, his ego inflating to massive proportions. "We have a few minutes for questions," Bradley said, holding up a hand to quiet the applause and acting like a benevolent visionary. "Who wants to start?" I stood up. I did not rush. I did not yell. I simply stood up from my chair in the back row, smoothing the front of my charcoal blazer. The room was large, but the silence that followed the applause made my voice carry perfectly across the expensive tables. "I have a question regarding your daily active user metrics," I said. My voice cut through the heavy, expensive air of the ballroom like a surgical scalpel. Hundreds of heads turned to look at me. Bradley froze on stage, his confident smile instantly shattering into a mask of pure terror. The microphone in his hand dropped a few inches. He looked at our mother, absolute panic flashing across his face. Justine, Bradley stammered into the microphone, trying to force a weak laugh to cover his sudden dread. "This is an investor question and answer session. Family questions can wait until Thanksgiving dinner." A few people in the audience chuckled awkwardly, but the heavy-hitting investors from the venture capital firms looked confused and annoyed by the interruption. "I am not here as your sister," I stated, taking a slow, measured step out into the center aisle so the entire room could see me clearly. "I am here as the managing director of Ironclad Holdings, the primary secured creditor of AuraSync. And my question is incredibly straightforward. How exactly do you plan to achieve $70 million in revenue when your entire user base consists of a paid bot-click farm operating out of a warehouse in Eastern Europe?" The silence in the ballroom became absolute suffocating and incredibly dangerous. The kind of silence that precedes a massive structural collapse. The venture capitalists stopped taking notes. The room felt like a vacuum had just sucked out all the oxygen. Security Barbara shrieked from the front row, completely abandoning her polished socialite persona. "Get her out of here right now. She is mentally unstable. She is a liar." "Do not bother," I said, projecting my voice clearly over her frantic yelling. "Because every single investor in this room is about to see the exact same data I am looking at." Before the event began, I had paid one of the catering staff a highly generous sum of cash to place a sleek black card on every single table in the ballroom, right next to the expensive floral centerpieces. "Ladies and gentlemen," I continued, maintaining absolute clinical precision. "On your tables, you will find a small card featuring a QR code. I highly suggest you scan it with your phones before you write a single check to this man." A ripple of chaotic movement swept through the room as dozens of wealthy investors instinctively reached for the black cards and lifted their smartphones. Bradley was hyperventilating on stage, gripping the microphone stand. "Do not scan that," he begged, his voice cracking. "It is fabricated. She is a disgruntled former accountant trying to extort me. It is a virus, but venture capitalists do not ignore free financial intelligence." The screens of their phones lit up as the QR code directed them to a secure, heavily encrypted website I had personally built. The website contained the unredacted, SEC-ready forensic audit of Aura Sync. "What you are looking at is a legally acquired forensic analysis of the internal servers Bradley just stood on stage and lied to you about." I explained, my voice echoing in the dead quiet room. "If you navigate to page 4, you will see the exact routing numbers for the offshore shell companies registered in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. You will see the bank statements showing how Bradley took his $5 million seed funding and funneled it directly into his personal checking accounts to pay for his penthouse and his luxury sports cars." Gasps and angry murmurs began to break out across the ballroom. Men and women in expensive suits were staring at their phones, scrolling furiously through the irrefutable data, their faces turning bright red with realization and outrage. "If you navigate to page 9, I pushed on, driving the final nail into the coffin. You will see the raw server hosting costs. Aura Sync is bleeding cash with 0 actual daily active users. There is no software. There is no ecosystem. It is a textbook Ponzi scheme, and he brought you all here tonight to use your $20 million to pay off the $8 million commercial loan his mother fraudulently secured by forging our grandfather's signature." The room exploded. It was a scene of absolute corporate carnage. Investors jumped out of their chairs, shouting angrily at the stage. Several prominent venture capitalists immediately turned and began marching aggressively toward the exit, furiously dialing their legal teams on their cell phones. The illusion was completely shattered, instantly vaporized by cold, hard, undeniable data. Bradley dropped the microphone. It hit the wooden stage with a loud, piercing screech of feedback. He looked like his legs were going to give out. Barbara was frozen in the front row, her mouth hanging open in sheer, unadulterated terror. She finally realized that the QR code did not just expose Bradley's fake company. It exposed her forgery. It exposed her federal bank fraud. It exposed absolutely everything. She turned to look at me across the chaotic room, her eyes begging for a mercy she had never once shown me in my entire life. I stared back at her with absolute freezing indifference. The trap had officially sprung, and there was absolutely no way out. The panic in the grand ballroom was not just a quiet retreat, it was a full-blown corporate stampede. The wealthy venture capitalists and elite angel investors did not just walk toward the exit, they shoved past each other, desperate to put as much physical distance between themselves and Bradley as humanly possible. I stood perfectly still in the back row, watching the utter destruction of my brother's manufactured empire. The clattering of expensive crystal glasses tipping over and the heavy thud of overturned chairs echoed through the massive room. Bradley scrambled across the polished wooden stage, desperately grabbing the microphone he had dropped. The speakers emitted a harsh, deafening screech of audio feedback that made several fleeing investors cover their ears. "Wait!" Bradley screamed into the microphone, his voice cracking with sheer, unadulterated panic. "You have to listen to me. Do not look at those phones. That data is completely fabricated." She is a disgruntled former accountant trying to sabotage my company out of petty jealousy. It is corporate espionage. I have the real numbers right here. We are revolutionizing the digital workspace. You cannot just leave. But venture capitalists are apex predators in the financial world, and they know exactly what a bleeding, dying animal looks like. A prominent billionaire investor wearing a custom-tailored tuxedo stopped at the center aisle, turned around, and threw the sleek black card with the QR code directly at the stage. "Save your breath, kid," the investor shouted, his voice booming with absolute disgust. "Your server hosting costs are public record now. You are running a phantom click farm and trying to pay us off with our own stolen equity. My legal team will be contacting the authorities before my car even reaches the highway." Bradley dropped the microphone for the second time. He looked like a terrified, lost little boy wearing a suit that was entirely too big for him. The arrogant tech visionary persona evaporated completely, leaving behind a pathetic, sweating fraud who finally realized he was entirely out of moves. The mass exodus was a physical wave of absolute rejection. Within 3 minutes, the grand ballroom was completely stripped of its elite guests, leaving only the confused catering staff, my horrified mother, and my trembling brother standing on a stage that had just become his personal gallows. I knew the investors would call the authorities, but I had already saved them the trouble. I turned toward the massive, heavy brass doors at the rear of the ballroom. I raised my right hand and gave a sharp, deliberate nod to the event security staff standing by the exit. They pulled the heavy doors wide open, allowing the cold draft of the Chicago night to sweep into the stifling room. A highly coordinated team of 12 men and women in dark, weather-resistant windbreakers strode into the Palmer House ballroom. The bright yellow letters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Securities and Exchange Commission were printed clearly across their broad backs. They moved with a terrifying synchronized efficiency that instantly sucked the remaining oxygen out of the room. The lead federal agent did not even pause to look at the overturned tables or the spilled champagne. He marched straight down the center aisle, passing me with a brief acknowledging nod, and walked directly up the short steps to the stage. Bradley froze, completely paralyzed by the sight of the federal badges. He took one weak, stumbling step backward before his knees gave out entirely. He collapsed onto the polished wood of the stage, his chest heaving with rapid, shallow breaths. Bradley Sterling, the lead agent, announced, his voice a booming baritone that required absolutely no microphone amplification. "You are under arrest for multiple counts of federal wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and securities deception. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The sharp metallic clicking sound of heavy steel handcuffs snapping tightly around my brother's wrists echoed beautifully through the cavernous ballroom. They hauled him to his feet, roughly patting down his expensive tailored suit for contraband. As they read him the remainder of his Miranda rights, under the glowing neon sign of his fake tech company, the absolute finality of the moment settled deep into my bones. This was no longer a toxic family dispute. This was the crushing weight of federal law, and there were no mothers around who could buy his way out of it. They marched him down the stage stairs, perp walking the golden boy of the Sterling family, right past the lingering press photographers, who had stayed behind specifically to capture the spectacular collapse. The camera flashes illuminated his tear-streaked, terrified face, cementing his ruin in digital history forever. I turned to leave my mission entirely accomplished, and my grandfather's mandate fully executed. But before I could reach the exit, a desperate, grasping hand clawed violently at the sleeve of my custom charcoal blazer. It was Barbara. She was completely unrecognizable. Her perfect, expensive salon blowout was ruined, hanging in limp strands around her face. Her waterproof mascara was running in thick black lines down her pale cheeks, and her designer morning suit looked disheveled and pathetic. She fell to her knees right there on the polished marble floor, gripping my arm with terrifying, hysterical strength. "Justine, please," she sobbed, her voice cracking into a high-pitched, desperate wail. "You have to stop this. Tell them it is a massive mistake. You know the people at the Federal Bureau. You gave them the files. You can take them back. You cannot let them take my son away. We are family, Justine. You are my daughter. You cannot do this to us. I gave you life. I looked down at the woman who had spent 33 years systematically trying to destroy my spirit. I looked at the mother who had handed my brother a $2 million novelty check and slid a $100 restaurant gift card across a table to me while laughing at my dreams. I looked at the criminal who had forged my grandfather's signature and tried to steal his legacy. I reached down and methodically peeled her manicured, trembling fingers off my suit jacket one by one. I stepped back, creating a firm physical boundary between her toxic desperation and my hard-earned peace. I did not do this to you, Mom, I said, my voice completely stripped of any anger, sorrow, or pity. I just stopped hiding the things you did to yourselves. You made your bed. I looked at her tear-stained, terrified face and delivered the absolute final blow, perfectly mirroring the exact words she had thrown at me when I begged her for help. Go earn your own way out. I turned my back on her sobbing, broken form and walked out of the Palmer house, stepping into the crisp, freezing Chicago night, feeling lighter and more powerful than I had ever felt in my entire life. 6 months later, the dust had completely settled, leaving a radically altered landscape in its wake. The federal justice system moves notoriously slow, but wire fraud packaged with an airtight bow by a licensed forensic accountant tends to severely expedite the legal process. Bradley did not even try to take it to trial. Facing mountains of irrefutable digital evidence, he accepted a plea deal. He was sentenced to 8 years in a minimum security federal correctional facility. There were no luxury sports cars or sprawling penthouses where he was going. Just a small concrete cell, a rigid daily schedule, and a whole lot of time to think about his visionary leadership capabilities. Barbara's downfall was even more poetic and deeply satisfying. When I officially and legally foreclosed on the $8 million commercial debt, she was forced into immediate total bankruptcy. I did not show a single ounce of mercy. The massive suburban estate, the vacation homes in Lake Geneva, the vintage car collection, everything was systematically seized and aggressively liquidated to satisfy the massive lien. Ironclad Holdings absorbed it all, protecting Grandpa Harrison's manufacturing empire just as he had originally intended. Barbara now lives in a tiny rented one-bedroom apartment in a dismal gray suburb far outside the city limits. To make ends meet and pay off her remaining legal restitution, she works 40 hours a week as a floor cashier at a mid-tier retail clothing store. The woman who once mocked me for working my way through school is now spending her golden years folding sweaters and standing on her feet for minimum wage. The ultimate irony is that her retail store is located just down the street from her old country club. She regularly has to ring up purchases for the exact same wealthy socialites she used to rule over, suffering the quiet, devastating humiliation of their pitying glances every single day. As for me, my boutique forensic accounting firm absolutely exploded in the aftermath of the Orasync takedown. Exposing a massive multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme on a highly public stage turned out to be the ultimate marketing campaign. The very venture capital firms that had previously dropped me came crawling back, offering triple my original retainer fees to secure my services. I had to lease an entire floor of a premium commercial high-rise just to house my new staff and manage the massive influx of high-profile corporate clients seeking absolute, uncompromising financial integrity. I am now the most sought-after crisis management financial agency in the entire city of Chicago. On a warm, beautiful Saturday evening in May, I hosted a private dinner party in my own home. It was not a sprawling suburban mansion funded by stolen money, but a stunning, modern industrial loft overlooking the glittering Chicago skyline, paid for entirely by my own massive success and relentless grit. The long dining table was surrounded by my loyal data extraction specialists, Mr. Caldwell, and the genuine friends who had stood by me when I had absolutely nothing. There was no fake family harmony, no toxic manipulation, and no conditional love, just real, authentic connection and mutual respect. I stood up at the head of the table, clinking my crystal glass gently with a silver spoon to get their attention. The room quieted down, filled with warm smiles and supportive faces. I raised my drink toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city I had finally conquered. To Grandpa Harrison, I said, a genuine bright smile spreading across my face. To the value of a hard-earned dollar, the unbreakable power of integrity, and the absolute pricelessness of the truth. My chosen family raised their glasses in unison, echoing the toast. I took a sip of the expensive champagne, feeling the cool liquid slide down my throat. I had fought a brutal war against the people who were supposed to love me most, and I had survived the fire to build an empire of my own. I had earned my own way, and the view from the top was absolutely spectacular. If my journey has taught me anything, it is that true power cannot be inherited, borrowed, or stolen. It must be forged in the fires of your own resilience. For years, I watched my mother and brother build an empire of illusions, trading our family's legacy for the superficial validation of country club status and fake corporate metrics. They firmly believed that loud arrogance could permanently mask their quiet incompetence. But reality always collects its debts. The hardest lesson I had to learn was that sharing blood with someone does not obligate you to finance their delusions or endure their systematic abuse. Society conditions us to believe that family is an unbreakable bond requiring infinite forgiveness. When the people who are supposed to protect you become your greatest threat, the most profoundly loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away and cut the cord entirely. Integrity is the only currency that never depreciates. While my brother was busy faking numbers to impress venture capitalists, I was sitting in a freezing studio apartment, grinding through spreadsheets and building an incorruptible reputation. When the storm finally hit, his fragile house of cards collapsed in seconds, while my foundation of hard, honest work remained absolutely unshakable. You do not need the approval of toxic people to build a beautiful life. You just need the courage to earn your own way and the wisdom to surround yourself with a chosen family who values your authentic truth. Share your own stories of setting hard boundaries against toxic relatives in the comments below. If my journey resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about financial independence, unrelenting integrity, and claiming your absolute power.